Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 123 of the Simpa Life Podcast. That was very fun. I'm looking forward to the next few episodes where I get to do that until, again, we run out of hand gestures, until my brain doesn't think fast enough to figure out what numbers I get to do that again with. But anyway, folks, obviously, summer, gone, weather, crap. I'm not going to rant on about the usual stuff that I do and complain, because today's guest comes from the beautiful southeast, my geography is terrible, of America. And I really want to just delve straight in. I don't want to give you my usual waffle and crap. This is probably going to be a long episode, so maybe pause now, empty your bladders, stock your pipes and your bongs, get your joints rolled. You're going to want to fucking listen to this story. So today's guest is a self-described saltwater cowboy and prolific veteran smuggler who between 1979 and 1989 was in charge of an international cannabis smuggling operation responsible for the importation of, get this, an estimated 30 million pounds, which is approximately 13.6 million kilograms, or as we've just worked out, about 35-ish Airbus A380s worth of cannabis into the Florida Everglades. They are Tim McBride, and I cannot wait to hear this story. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great, Simpa. Thanks, buddy, for having me on, man. I love my UK fans, dude. They're just awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait for them to.
Particularly, I'm excited to impart this bit of Southwest Florida, even American history is actually what we're going to be talking about with history of the Caribbean marijuana industry in particular.
Definitely,
but,
and that has.
Thanks again.
For sure. We have a slight delay, so we're going to try and, or I'm going to try and be a bit patient with the way I speak. Obviously, my audience will be quite aware that I like to jibber jabber. But I think, this is the wonderful tie-in here of the Caribbean roots of the cannabis culture here in the UK that came with the Windrush generation that we had post the Second World War and dub and reggae culture. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of crossover over the pond, as it were, with the topics here. But as you see, I think that this story, along with, one of my personal heroes from the UK, Howard Marks, and others, it's starting to fill in the narrative of how everybody basically got high because of a couple of people, not a couple, but a small tight-knit group of people around the world that, really went above and beyond at time when people were facing execution by, firing squads and hanging for such things in regions around the world. So I, doff my cap to you for everything that you've done. And without further ado, let's jump into this, man.
No, absolutely. And you know what? You are absolutely correct in the fact that, and I've always got to stress this, regardless, because the story in which you're about to hear is fantastic as it is. You have to understand, and as well as I do, that we weren't the only ones hauling pot through the Caribbean or anywhere. Let's just get that out of the way. And I don't intend to come off as being that. The story that I wrote in the industry that I grew up in is a story in which involves a small town of just under 500 people, and a town in which half the population was involved in what we were doing, and learned over the period of nearly 40 years and 3 generations how to integrate this behavior into a way of life and run these southern waters in the Caribbean with literal impunity. This is the story that I impart. And everybody out there, that understands the cannabis and the history of cannabis, and your guy right down there, God bless him, and God bless everybody who made a shot at it, whether you got away with it or didn't get away with it, man. You were helping support the demand that was crucially, and that people were, and a product that people were craving at that time. And I just happened to, kind of trip and fell almost right into it, and that's, I think that's where we should begin. Of course, obviously at the beginning, and I had, I'd grown up in North Carolina. My father was 82nd Airborne in the Army and took a job out of the Army in the Midwest, which took me along with them because I was still, a young man. And I did my 4 years of high school in a small southern Wisconsin town. And, having finished high school and being bored with, what was going on. And I had always been, the kind of person that where if, something came along that sounded like it was a good deal or it was, different or new or exciting or whatever the case may be, I just decided just to go do it. because I had adopted this philosophy early on whereby I never wanted to look back on my life and kick myself in the ass and say, geez, I wish I'd have fucking done that. I just went and did it. Then I would relieve myself of any regret of having not done whatever it was, But opportunities come and go, and like human beings, opportunities are passed and, along and like that. Well, late 1970s, say 79, my neighbor was my dearest friend. His sister had moved to Florida, and she was married to one of the locals down here in Everglades on Chokoloskee Island. If you will Google Everglades City, you'll find out that there's a little island attached by a causeway called Chokoloskee. It's 139 acres of just paradise. And it's nestled in the northwest corner of the Everglades National Park in an area that's described as the 10,000 Islands. And it is quite literally a labyrinth of 10,000 islands that stretches nearly 50 miles of our southwest Florida coastline. And it's anywhere from 4 to 5 miles deep. And it's just this outlandish labyrinth. Look it up, Google it, 10,000 Islands, and you'll be amazed. But this was our playground as kids. This is where we lived, we worked. This is where we lived. This is where we played, where we water skied, where we fucked off all the time. So we knew these areas in and out like the back of our hands, But an outsider, no matter who you are, I don't care if you're local sheriff department or whatever, if you're not from that area like that and you're not in those islands every day, we're going to lose you. And that's for sure. And I think that's one of the reasons what made what we did so successful was the geography in which we had to work. But that being said, I was what was described by our United States government as a third generation pot hauler, pot smuggler. And what that meant quite literally was that us as kids, guys and gals, it wasn't just the guys involved. The gals were involved in this as well, because when you're talking about a town of just under 400 people and half the town was doing it, you got to include them as well. So we learned from the fathers and uncles and older cousins and grandpas that were still around and like that. They in turn learned from that generation before them. Fathers and uncles and older cousins and people like that. So we wound up being the kids of the second generation. And when we got into our early 20s, and we were working on stone crabbing and fishing in that area was the major industry in that area. And stone crabs are a delicacy that are found only in these Southwest Florida waters. And they're sold all over the world for ridiculous prices. And they're caught in traps that are about, I don't know how you would say this in metric, but I'll have to tell you like in inches here, probably about 28 inches wide facing. They're probably about 12, maybe a foot and a half, say 18 inches tall. And deep wise, that maybe 14, 15, 16 inches. They're not very big, but the bottom 6 inches of these things are full of concrete. They're heavy as shit. They're like 50 pounds almost. Some of them are 60 pounds. And the reason that big chunk is in there is because when we take our catch out of this trap and I go to push it off the back of the boat and put it back in the water when it's rebaited, it has to land on its bottom because the crabs have to get through the top. So that weight, every time you push it off, doesn't matter. It's going to land on the bottom, just, like it's supposed to. We had 6,000 traps. And I don't know if you're in the UK or have the ability to have seen a program called Deadliest Catch.
I know Deadliest Catch,
filmed in Alaska. And it's done by Raw TV, which is out of the UK. But it's similar to the way they do their traps, and only in the fact of how the mechanics of it work. Obviously, our traps aren't 1,000 pounds, they're only 50. But the means by which you catch and pull the buoys in are similar. We don't throw a grapple hook and grab between two floating bags that have a rope. Ours has a small, about just smaller than a soccer ball or a football size, rather, styrofoam ball with a rope on it that's only 3/8 inch nylon. It's not an inch rope. It's 3/8 inch nylon. But the mechanisms by which this works is we don't throw a grapple. We have a catch pole with a hook on it. We grab that buoy and we pull it up and pull us through a block and tackle. And that spinning thing that you see on Deadliest Catch, that they put the rope in, and What it is actually designed like two pipe hands like this. And when you put the rope in the center of them, it reaches that squeeze point and begins to pull on the rope as it's turning. And they have a piece on the bottom like ours does. It's called a knife, but it's not really a knife. What it is designed to kick the rope back out so it doesn't continue to wrap around that. They use so much line, they put it in a coiler and recoil it. Ours are at the most 80 feet long, so they're just coiling at our feet. But the traps are set. We do 600 a day. We were pulling 600 traps a day. I would pull 600, and the guy on the other side, which was the port side puller on the stern, port side stern, which was my best friend who I came down to Florida with, and we'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to impart to you how this stone crabbing was done, briefly. And he would reach out and grab a buoy and pull his buoy. Now he's pulling his trap. Now he's clearing it and cleaning it and rebaiting it and getting it ready to shove back in the water while the boat's moving up to the next buoy. When I grab my buoy and start to pull my trap on board, he's pushing his back in. So for every one we pick up, we drop one. Every one we pick up, we drop one. And this goes for the first half is 300 traps, and then we'll have lunch. But that first half can run as far as 20, 21, 22 miles based on the distance that traps are spread apart. Then we skip over about 75 yards or say 60 meters or so and pull the other 300 back the direction we came. So we're not twice as far away from where we began. So this is an all day and ongoing process. And I'll tell you what, man, it's such ball busting fucking work. It'll make a man out of you just stone crabbing. And the typical stone crabber as a crewmate, as a crewmate, and they're coming from all over the country, and they're only last maybe a half a season, one season, and they've had enough. And the turnover is quick on deck. But a lot of the guys in town that I grew up with, that are working these vessels, and there's probably 25, 30 boats in the fleet between Everglades and Chokoloskee Island. And nearly every one of those boats was involved in doing what I'm about to tell you what we were doing. Now, I had come down from Florida to meet with my friend. He invited me down, actually called me. I had just gotten back from LA, and he called me. He says, "Hey, dude, I'm going to Florida tomorrow. I'm moving. I'm going to go work on a fishing boat," because his sister married one of the locals. And he was the man, and they both managed the only fish house on Chokoloskee Island. So they were local, and everybody knew them. So when he came down, he said, "You want to go with me?" And I said, "Hell yeah, dude." So I packed my Mustang, and the next day I was gone. Because like I said earlier, I'm one of those guys that I'm not passing up opportunity. I'm just going to go back and shit. So I packed my shit. Next thing I know, we're down on the island. But I hadn't had prearranged any kind of a job or anything like that, other than his sister and brother-in-law were building a new home. And I said, well, I'll tend for the masons and the carpenters and whatnot like that. Just make some money. I don't give a shit. And Mark went ahead. My buddy Mark went ahead and got the job on the boat. Well, there was two people, actually. There's three people on the boat. There's a captain, there's a first and second mate. And the first and second mate were at the stern, like I was telling you, back and forth with the traps. Excuse me. At this time, they had a guy on there from, I think it was like from Michigan or some shit. And Captain Billy, Captain Red in the book, Captain Billy, they didn't really know this guy or who he was from, we knew where he was from, but didn't really know anything about him. And they're very leery about people like that because of this small town, obviously, and at that time it was just, you hear the rumors or you hear the stories, every now and then the ghost stories about pothole and stuff like that, and it's never actually very real until you see it. Well, Captain Billy obviously was itching bad to get back, he wanted to get back into the business, back into power because everybody's working now. It's that time of year. So it didn't take but maybe a week for them to work this guy to do. He quit because it's real easy to do on a work boat like that. I mean, you can bust somebody's balls real quick. So this guy said, "Fuck," and he took off. And that's when Billy says, "Go get your buddy Tim. Let's get him on board. Let's go to work." So they imparted to me the story about how it works. You get up at, 3 in the morning or so, and you get on a boat because it takes hours to get to some of the lines, wherever you're going at that day. And as the sun's coming up and it's just becoming dawn, you start pulling that first buoy because you got a lot of traps to get through, man. Most boats in the fleets are only pulling 400, 450, maybe traps a day. we're pulling 600
Mm.
because, we had this shit figured out. So they told me how you get up early, blah, 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 like this. So I get on the boat that morning about 3 a.m. and I get in the bunks are in the wheelhouse where the captain is. I'm on the bottom bunk, Mark's on top. And I wake up, and the boat stopped and the sun's up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, they told me we were starting when the sun just barely comes up, and what the fuck? So I leaned over and I looked out of the bunk, and there's Captain Billy sitting in his chair with his big shit-eating grin on his face. And he goes, Timmy, he says, buddy, we're not going to pull traps today. He says, we're going to go offshore, later on tonight and unload a pot boat from Colombia. And I mean, just like that out of the blue. And I said, okay, cool. Why not? But it wound up being a bit of a tongue and a cheek affair with my buddy Mark and Captain Billy. They knew what was going on. They figured to spring it on me when I got out there and just see my reaction. I said, cool, let's go. So my first day working on that boat, I never saw one trap. We stayed out there and goofed off offshore. And then later on that evening, about 4 hours or so before dark, Captain Billy made a call sign, which every boat that we approached from that point on had a particular call sign. And when that call sign is answered, that boat knows that whoever's coming to it is the one that should be, and not to freak out. So 4 hours or so before sundown, we'll approach the boat. Mm-hmm. Well, not to get into any great detail at this point in time, we wound up putting 15,000 U.S. pounds of shit on our boat and headed back into shore with it. Once we got back into we couldn't take it through the pass and get it to our island. You had to go through this labyrinth of, like I said, 10,000 islands, which was our barrier. Our island was in the back of those islands, near the mainland. Mm. And you had to go through that labyrinth of islands to get to Chokoloskee, where we lived. And what happened, we would pull up just to the edge of the islands, and 15, 20, 30 little boats with two guys on each one that could go shallow would come up next to our boat like flies on a garbage can, man. And then one of their guys would jump on and just start throwing them on their boat. Everybody's grabbing and throwing and unloading, and they're making paths that we've got a prearranged course through the islands that nobody takes. To get it to one of our buddies' houses for a load this size, one of our buddies' houses that we've taken all the furniture out of. These boats run in there and they get it off onto the dock and hand it to the people on shore. And the guys on shore, which is the shore crew, they're running it up to the front door or the back door of the house, and they're throwing it inside. And the guys inside are stacking it in the bedroom, bathrooms, kitchens, dining room, living room, closets, man. Anywhere you could stick a bale of fucking weed, there was one in there, And they would continue this until our boat was empty. Then we would go offshore to wherever and typically sit next to a line of traps that we might want to pull some on the next day before coming in, and clean our boat, clean everything down, scrub it, get all the seeds and all the shit, because Caribbean marijuana at that time was seedy. There was males born with females all over the fucking place. It didn't matter, the science and, that that's available to us today, and the understanding rather, wasn't there at the time. And it wasn't able to do in mass quantities such as this. If when you look down through the mountains and all you can, see through the valley, as far as I can see, and there's weed growing, it's hard to get those female plants out of those male plants out of there, But that being said, I wasn't really understanding at that time the entire scenario about the shore crew and what happened after we passed it off to them. But all I know is the next day, when we got up, we pulled maybe 100 to 300 traps to get some crab and came back in, and rested for the evening and stuff. And then we would get up that next morning. I got up at like 3:30 that next morning and headed out to go work today. Well, again, I wake up and the sun's up, and I look over and I look out at Billy again, and he goes, "Sorry, Timmy, no traps today, buddy." He says, "We're going for 22 tons tonight, 44,000 pounds." Wow. And I said, "Okay, let's go." So my first 2 days working on this fishing vessel were the first 2 days the nights I ever hauled pot from Colombian vessels. And I never saw the first trap. I never saw trap one, man. That third day, of course, we went on to working and stuff like that. But in the 2 nights, in those, 15 tons and 22 tons, collectively, I made what was called rookie pay at that time. I made $5,000, $5,000 US each night, and 10 grand. Well, in 1979, even $10,000, $12,000 was an excellent blue collar wage at that time,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, damn, I could make a year's pay in, 2 nights. That was cool. But now that the captain understood that he had a crew that was willing and actually able to do the work that we were doing, um, my pay then increased to the size of the load we were hauling. So now I'm making anywhere from $50 to $100,000 US a night, and I'm just turning 21 years old, man. You know, and our job at that time, like I said, and we would work 2, 3 nights, and then you'd have to take off because, when you're unloading, ultimately you're unloading vessels that have, um, as much as 30 tons, 40
Mm-hmm.
tons. I've seen ships out there that were anchored for 3, 4 days with as much as 300,000 US pounds on them. And we would take 3 and 4 nights at a time to go out and unload this ship.
Mm-hmm.
But we would work 2 or 3 nights, and then a couple of the other boats would jump in and they would do their share, because you can't continue to work like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about, humping 800 to 1,080 pound, say 35, 37 kilos each, 800 of them to 1,000 of them, and you're moving them twice a night, you can't be expected to continue to do that day after day after day. You'd fucking kill you. So we work as much as we could for 3 days, and then we'd take a couple of days off and let a couple of the other boats. That's how the whole town, half the town, was involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times we would go out to unload a boat, and I'll tell you about this one in particular. We went off one evening, 3 boats like our boat, and we'll put up some pictures to kind of correlate, with what I'm talking about. A picture of the boat that I actually worked on, me standing on the stern of it. And it would be, 3 commercial fishing vessels, 50 feet, 51 foot in length. The beam, which is the width of the boat at its widest, at midship,
Mm-hmm.
say 15 feet. And the wheelhouses are all forward, with the bunks in the wheelhouse and the captain and all that kind of stuff. And the entire deck and the entire back of the boat is designed to carry the traps that we're working. We could put 600 traps on our boat, and still carry that weight out to the fishing grounds, because that was really nothing. But the boats, as they were designed for traps, were perfectly designed and suited to stack bales of weed on.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, we would work 2, 3 nights in a row and sit back and, then let these other guys work and these guys work. But there was this, there were several times, and one time in particular, where it took 3 boats. We were expecting just over 30 tons, just over 60,000 US pounds, we figured was on this boat. So we thought, okay, let's send 3 boats. We could put 30,000. We could put as much as, almost 50,000 pounds on our one boat. But we decided to send 3 boats, each take 20 tons each, or 20,000 pounds each. Spread the load out. We can move faster. We can get the job done quicker, because we only have between the time the sun goes down till the time the sun comes up to get this
Mm-hmm.
shit from offshore, inshore, in somebody's house, 1 or 2 or even 3, 4 houses that we've literally taken the furniture out of and stuff them full. That has to be done before the sun comes up. Otherwise, we're caught with our fucking, with our pants down.
Yeah.
So that being said, we got 3 boats, and we're sitting outshore, and we're swimming, we're diving, we're getting stoned, and we're fucking off. We're waiting, for our time to work, for the, typically about 4 hours before the sun goes down. But that afternoon, we're out there screwing off, and out of nowhere, here comes this single engine Cessna aircraft. And it was flying like maybe 25 feet off of the water coming at us. And when you can't hear an airplane coming at you when it's flying 20 feet off the water. I don't care, until it gets right on top of you, and then you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this thing came over and it was just right over our heads, almost hit our low-ran antenna, which is our navigational antenna, which today your GPS. Back then
Mm-hmm.
it was called a LORAN, which is an acronym for Long Range Aid to Navigation. were triangulating radio signals in order, and they were fairly accurate at that time, but then GPS didn't exist. Well, he flies over our boat and he goes up and he banks and he turns like this, and all of a sudden we realize who this is. This is Daryl. This is Daryl Daniels. He's the guy that's running the show. Him and his four brothers, him and his other four brothers were the ones that were actually putting us all to work and making all this shit happen, right? Well, here comes Daryl. He flies around, circles around, and he throws a milk carton out the window, and it all flutters down and hits the water. And we pull over to it, and I grabbed it with my catch pole that we used to catch the traps and pull it on board, and there's a note inside. So Captain Billy, he takes the note out, and it says, one of you three vessels needs to go to these coordinates, and he puts the latitude and longitude on there. He says, because there's another boat over here that needs to be unloaded as well. So one of you guys has got to go work this, right? So we're waiting to unload a boat, and there's another one waiting, to get loaded. They didn't even know. They had a vessel out there, and they knew two of us could get the load comfortably enough, So we stayed with the original job. The other two flipped a coin, and one took off. So there was two of us now. So here we are. And we're about maybe 30 miles offshore. International waters on the Gulf side of the United States is territorial limits are 30 miles. Beyond that, you're in international water, and it's very difficult to get a boat to come in closer than that for radar reasons and and surveillance purposes and whatever like that. But there wasn't a lot of that in those days, surprisingly enough. But this boat was expected to have 30 tons. A little more, maybe 63,000 U.S. pounds. And we figured, okay, we could get, that's about 450 pieces each, on each boat, roughly, like that, blah, blah, blah. So about 4 hours before sundown, this scenario, Captain Billy goes into his Zorro, and he's waiting. He says it twice. We wait about 20, 30 seconds. Come back, Felipe Zorro, come on. That means approach us. And we are always sitting on what is referred to as the horizon. We're sitting just beyond the horizon, and that's the distance at which the further away you get from stuff, it shrinks and shrinks in the distance. Also, it disappears. Well, there's two things you're dealing with. You're dealing with distance, and you're also dealing with the curvature of the Earth, actually. So you go out of sight. So we would sit beyond that horizon line, out of sight of the vessel, until we make that call. Then we approach it. So that gives that crew time to start, bringing his stuff down from below and getting it up on deck. And with this scenario, I mean, this ship had been, it was 450 feet if it was a foot long. I mean, this thing was huge. And the weather deck was probably 16 feet above our deck. And as we're getting closer, we're seeing these guys. There's probably, I don't know, God, I'd have to guess at least 70 guys on this boat. And they were single file, back to back, going down one hatch door into the bilge, and coming out on the other side out of another hatch door from the bilge, back to back, with a bale of weed on their shoulders. And each one of these is between 60 and 80 pounds. And they're walking over to the edge, and they're throwing them off. They'll throw some off on that boat, our boat, that boat, our boat, back and forth like this. And these things were hitting the deck. They're hitting our fiberglass deck, and then we're starting to hear it crack and crunch, and we're going, oh, shit, they're going to destroy our boat. But because there were so many guys, I mean, I'm talking back to back, these fuckers were going down one hole and coming out another, carrying this shit and throwing. But our inability to keep up with, what they were doing kind of solved that problem, because they started to pile up. Now they're hitting one another. So they're cushioning the blow like this. And but we're you're having to watch and snatch and go, and we're putting them everywhere you can stick them. They're on the bow, they're on the sides around the wheelhouse, they're on the top of the boat on the wheelhouse, stacked up just high enough so the radar could turn, and then straight back. We're just stacking. And Captain Billy, he's having to stay at the controls and keep the boat against the ship, because this isn't a scenario whereby you can throw a rope and tie off. These guys are 16 feet above us, so Billy's counting, says, "Oh, we should be about there, Timmy." And I yell up to this captain. He's leaning against this rail, he's peeling an orange, and he goes, I yell up to him, I go, how many more? And he looks down at me and he goes in this fucked up accent. He goes, 50 more. So I'm thinking, okay, 50 more guys, 50 more. So that meant 25 their boat, 25 our boat, or whatever like that. So we're counting 50, and then we get to 60, 70, 80, and 100. We're like, Jesus Christ. So all three of us now, me and Mark and Captain Billy, we all up to this guy. We're saying, how many more of these fuckers are there? And the captain looks down at us. He goes, 50 more. And now I'm thinking this is the only number this guy knows. What language he's speaking, but this is probably the only number this guy knows. And we quite literally, they're still throwing this shit. We had to, because, if you're familiar with fishing vessels of any kind, or even a boat, just, ordinary boat on a lake and whatever like that, they have what's called scupper holes. And what scupper holes do on the stern of the boat is if any water or rainwater or water splashes onto the deck of the boat, it can run to the back and go out those little holes. Well, on our fishing vessels, we have scupper holes as well, and they're down grade level with the deck. Mm-hmm. But the water line is another 2 foot below that scupper hole. Well, as they fill the boat gets heavier and heavier and heavier, and it's approaching those scuppers. Now, if those scuppers go underwater, we're starting to take on water, and then we're going to sink. Mm. So we literally had to, say, that's enough. But it didn't work. They were still throwing these damn things. So we had to take a life jacket from the wheelhouse, cut the guts and the foam out of this life jacket, and stuff those scupper hose full. I mean, pack them like that. So we're not going to sink. And while we're doing that, Captain Billy, he starts the boat, and Captain Blackass, the other captain on the other boat, they start when we pull away, because if we stayed there, these guys are going to sink us because they keep throwing this shit. So we pull away, and I shit you not, Simpa, we're watching these guys. I mean, I'm on a mountain of fucking weed, dude, on this boat, and if you could see it from the air, it would literally look like a mountain of marijuana bales floating through the water with a radar on it, like that, because you couldn't see the boat. It was covered. I mean, literally every square inch was, 10, 12, 14 feet deep in this shit. Mm. So I'm watching, even with binoculars, we're watching this boat as we're going away from it, and they're still throwing these things off into the water. Oh, there's nobody there to get them, but they're not going to stick around with this shit, so they're throwing it off and I bet you, roughly speaking, they probably threw another 20 tons, 40,000 pounds off of this boat. Wow. Maybe it might have been more. I don't know, because there wasn't anybody there to get it. They're not going to sit there, and wait for somebody and this wasn't uncommon in those days. A lot of times, the mentality of who these people are who are loading these boats, and keep in mind that we never owned this shit. Mm. We were what the United States government describes as service providers. You didn't want to own this. All we had and knew was the ability to get this shit from anywhere in the Caribbean you wanted your weed from. We had a family connection because we were family and generational as well. Like I said earlier, I was third generation. This had been going on since the 60s, so they created family connections throughout these years. And so it was their intention when these Cubans or Colombians or whoever may be purchasing this stuff that, no matter what's on their boat, they're going to get it. They're going to take it all. Well, they don't understand. You can only take so much shit on a boat. I don't give a shit unless it's the same size one that it's coming off of, which ain't happening. They figured you'd just take it. So it wasn't uncommon for them to just put as much shit on there as, And there were times when, and like I said, I'd seen boats with as much as 200,000 and 300,000 pounds on them as a kid, and it would take 3-4 nights to unload them. In the early days, excuse me, you could approach a boat like that several times, but it was always a risky thing to do. Mm. And that's potholing 101. You never approach a boat twice. But as the years progressed and went on, that never happened. You get one time and you get going. Well, this was at a time when you approached the boat one goddamn time, you get what you can get, and oh well. They would turn around and head off, and quickly you would have it all. But this time they figured, you'll just take it. Well, we didn't. and they just this shit was throwing. And now when it hits the water, bales become what's called here in the States square grouper. Grouper is a rather large fish, and it's a delicacy. It's sold, in many restaurants and fish markets and all this kind of stuff. But and they get big, they get huge. They get as much 60, 70, 200 pounds they can get. There's Goliath grouper. And so some of the older generations coined the term square grouper because you got a bale, which is rectangular, obviously, it's not square, but when it hits the water, it becomes a square grouper. So whenever somebody heard square grouper on the radio, that meant there's some shit floating somewhere. We'll get to this later. This is some funny shit. But we take this load in, we get it into shore, and, obviously the shore crew takes over, they do their thing. We filled 3 houses with this stuff. Now, what happens is, while we're filling the houses, now it has to come off of that island somehow. Now, there's only one way into Everglades City and one way out, and that's a highway. It's called 29. One road. You get out to that one road, and there's only one road that goes to Miami, US 41. So there's only one way to get from where we are to Miami. There's only one way in there and one way out. So what happens is, while we're unloading and they're loading these houses at night, the shore crew, which are the drivers, because we have to drive this shit to Miami. It's got to get there somehow. And it ain't going in a semi truck or some stupid shit like that. This is how the entire town, even the women, start to get involved. Now, we're the offshore crew, and the offshore crew entails the 15, 20, 30 other little boats with 2 guys on them. That's quite a bunch of people. It takes on the average, anywhere from 50 to 70 people to make one job work. And that's why you can't continue to work these people. That's why, more and more people in the town started being involved in this shit. But that being said, while we're loading these houses tonight, a lot of times what the vehicle owners would do would they drive out to where we're offloading and loading the house and get their vehicle loaded, whether it be a car, a truck, a van, a dump truck. We even loaded dump trucks full of shit. And they would take them into town and park them right in the front yard and let them sit there all night full. And call their driver, because the owners of the vehicles are never the ones that drive them. They're the ones that load them, but the drivers that they call to come and take and drive this shit to a pre-designated spot in Miami, which I'll tell you about in a second, they would come and everybody working, all 70 people or so, however many working are, have within their grasp of what's called a 2-meter radio. It's like a handheld, like a walkie-talkie. And on the top, it has 5-digit combination that you can choose whatever combination you wish. And at those times, it was virtually unscannable. You couldn't pick up our frequencies. So we had like 200 of these. So made sure everybody had one. So the drivers would be, they would not know where the vehicle that they're driving got loaded. So they get in it and they're told where to go in Miami. It's one road to Miami. That's US 41. And in West Miami, a place called Kendall, off a street called Chrome Avenue, and we would pick out a plaza, or the older generations or whoever was in charge of the operation at that time would choose a plaza whereby the drivers would be instructed how to get there, pull into the plaza with their van, truck, car, whatever the case may be, and get out of the vehicle, go window shop for a while. And what would take place at that point would be, we'd have one guy working with the Cubans that owned it working together in this parking lot, and our guys pointing at, that's our truck, that's our van, that's our car, that's us, that's us. They get out, their guys would go get in it, drive it away to wherever their stash spot in Miami was, and unload it and bring it back empty. Our guys would get back in their vehicles when they saw it come back and go make another load if there was time. So we were running this shit all day. Now, their getaway, they had an escape valve built into that scenario, because we're talking 30, 40 drivers. I mean, because, we're moving at any one time, 40 tons of shit off this island almost every day. Yeah. Who would have suspected this little town, a bumfuck nowhere Everglades, and there's 40 tons of weed coming out of here every day? It's just boggles the mind. But we were masters of hiding in plain sight, because the only way to do this is during the day. And 99 times out of 100, these guys and gals are waving at the cops when they go by, hey, how you doing? Like this shit. But as remote as it is, there's maybe 2 highway patrol officers working during the day, 1 Marine patrol officer working at any time, night or day. There were only 2 sheriff's deputies in Everglades City, this little town we lived in, and 1 sheriff, and Sheriff C.W. Sanders, and 2 sheriff's deputies. Well, just so happens one of the sheriff's deputies' son was part of the crew. So when his dad was working, it was like the back door was open, man. It was just like, no problems. But that all being said, the drivers always had a means by which they could escape. And what I'm alluding to is the simple fact that there were at any one time anywhere between 10 to 15 other people driving that are being paid $5,000 a day just to drive from Everglades to that plaza and back. All 15 drivers, and they would come in staggered positions. Someone would be going, they'd pass coming back and like this. So the road was covered. And what that meant was that if any of those drivers had, for whatever reason would be stopped, they're instructed to wait till whoever stops you gets between your vehicle and theirs. Throw that thing you're driving into reverse, and now it weighs almost a ton more than it should weigh, and you smack that thing as hard as you can snag it.
Fuck.
And destroy the front end of it, and he's not going anywhere. But you're not going to outrun the radio. But seeing how we're out in the middle of nowhere, because nothing between Everglades and Miami exists except Everglades. I mean, it's, as far as you can see, nothing. But it would take on the average 45 minutes or better for another highway patrolman that's cruising back to even get to where you're at. So all you needed to do is, since he can't follow you, drive to where he can't see you, and one of the spotters would pick you up. Because by that time, you're already going, hey, man, I'm done. It's over with. Shit, I'm busted like that. So cream that guy, get out of his way, leave it sitting in the middle of the road, and get in the spotter's car and drive away. Let him have it. Why let him have it? Simply because the person driving it would call ahead and say, I'm busted. I, or whoever was in charge of the work, would call the owner of that vehicle and say, it's over with, call the cops. He would call the local law enforcement, and say, you know what, I just looked out in my driveway and my truck's missing, or my car's gone. And he reports it stolen, which relieves him of any responsibility for which that thing has been involved in, and he'll get it back. So same thing, same scenario existed offshore for us. We're loaded. And like I said, we're barely moving with this load. I mean, we're doing maybe 4 knots, 5 knots, if that. It's this big, powerful boats. They're not built for speed. They're built for power, because it's a work vessel, a fishing vessel. You can put a lot of weight and traps on that boat. So we would have what's called a chase boat. And I'll also, we can put up a picture of my personal boat, chase boat. It's typically a deep V hull vessel that's, capable of doing probably anywhere between 60 and 70 miles an hour before your ass can even hit the seat. It's designed for offshore, powerful getaway. And this boat with one guy driving is right there next to us as we're loaded. We're coming from offshore to onshore, and he's always right there. And once the boat is loaded, my work and my buddy Mark, the first mate, our work's done for now. All we can do is lay back on the back of this thing, and we're going through and we're checking it out. We're testing it to see if it's worth taking any of it. So, whether the guys we can tell the guys in town, yeah, this shit, you got to get some of this, But Captain Billy now is in the warehouse, and he's doing his job, man. He's working. He's on the radar. He's watching. He's, paying attention. And we have radar for 50 miles. And if it looked like there's a target looked like it might be coming toward us, as it gets closer, you can shrink that radar to 45 to 40, 35, 30 miles, and down to 10 miles, 5 miles even. And if it looks like it's coming toward us, all we have to do is get on that go fast boat on into the night and let him have the shit. Because once again, Billy didn't own the boat. His dad did. So if something like that looked like it's going to happen, he'd get on the radio. Hey, Dad. Like that, Dad would call the cops and say, hey, I just walked down to where my boat's supposed to be. It's gone. So same scenario. Stolen boat, you get it back. because they can't prove we were on it. But that never happened. It was always there as a safety valve just in case. So we never lost a load that way because we were always very diligent in what it was we were doing. And besides, we're out in the middle of nowhere. You're in the southwest coast of Florida, and there's nothing there virtually beyond from Everglades City. If you Google it and look on a map, from Everglades City down to the very tip of Florida, there's nothing there but islands and Everglades. And, miles and miles of beautiful white sand beaches where no one exists unless you choose to go down and throw up a campsite or whatever like that. It's just a beautiful place to live and grow up. But this is the geography in which we had to work. And this is the scenario by which all this took place, and there was, I had seen, over the first couple of years of doing this, I had seen this stuff packaged in so many different ways and have it come on so many different types of vessels. And it wasn't always as easy as the captain goes offshore, he makes the call, and we approach the boat and we pull up there. And it wasn't always easy as pulling up and the shit just come raining down on our boat. 99 times out of 100, we would pull up to this shrimp boat or yacht or whatever kind of vessel that we could board actually, and help the crew get down below, bring the load up onto the deck, because there's only, their crews aren't very large either. There may be 2-3 guys on there, plus the captain, and the captains have to maintain the vessel's positioning, and the crews do the work. So we would help their crew put stuff on the deck from their hull. Once it's on the deck, we would jump down onto our boats, and now they can throw the stuff over, and we can start loading. So it wasn't always that easy to get it loaded and pull away. There had been times, even like I said, when we were unloading these vessels in the earlier days, when they had like 100,000 pounds or better, 200,000-300,000 of them, the hatches on these on the weather deck of these vessels were huge, and they're designed to be used at the dock with a crane and a net and lifting the cargo out and stuff like that. But the cranes exist on the docks. They don't exist on the boats. So what we had to do was, because it's such a deep hole, and we would put the bales in a pyramid, stack them up, and we'd have guys standing at different levels of this pyramid. We'd bucket brigade this shit and hand it to this guy. He'd hand it to that guy. And then the guy would push it up where the guys on the deck could actually grab it and pull it up like this. Just insane, but we were taking so much shit out of Colombia in those days, and even Jamaica. Anywhere in the Caribbean that you wanted weed from, if it'd be Jamaica, if it'd be Venezuela, it'd be Colombia, it'd be Central America, anything but in Mexico. Nobody wanted that crap, coming out of Mexico at that time. They wanted the specialized Belize was a great place, and prior to that was British Honduras, and Honduras right next door to it. And, Costa Rica, Central American countries had a lot of decent product coming out of it, and a lot of it. And depending on where you wanted your stuff from, we had a family connection. Because like I said, not only were we family and generational, us kids learning from the dads and uncles and so on and that sort of thing, where we were going throughout the rim of the Caribbean were family and generational as well. So, as we spoke earlier, and people, and a lot of people are curious about, violence and, that sort of thing, because it's the, illegal drug trade or whatever, however you choose to describe it. Well, I have to tell you, in all honesty, that, when you're working at that level, the level at which we were working, and, we're talking about, I had written a story in one of the chapters of my books where our crews worked 28 nights in a row. And I did a rough calculation to the tune of 1.6 million pounds went through that little island area in 28 nights. And people have a hard time understanding, how this business can be done without, and they have, when you talk about dealing with Cubans in Miami and working in like that, they have this vision of, dimly lit back rooms with shadowy figures standing against the walls and guns on the table, and smoky, and well, nothing could be further from the truth, man. That's all TV, Hollywood made up kind of bullshit, and maybe it did happen, in other places once or twice or shit like that, but never once did it happen like that with us. When I started even making deals, my deals were made, and I've made $100 million deals in downtown Miami, standing on a street corner in front of a Cuban cafe, dunking Cuban bread into Cuban coffee and a handshake. That's just how it was done. You give me the money, and and particularly the violence aspect of it that we want to talk about, and that being no violence at that level, simply because, and it's a matter of mathematics. If I can buy, and this was possible, and this is how it actually happened, I could go to anywhere in the Caribbean, whether it be Jamaica, South America, Central America. I could buy per pound anything you wanted for $10 a pound, $10 US a pound. By the time whatever I paid $10 for crosses that international waters line at 30 miles into the United States territory, it jumps from $10 a pound to anywhere from $500 to $750 a pound. So I could quite literally take up to, say, $300,000 of some, cocaine cowboys' money, because they were running rampant in cocaine in Miami. It was destroying our South Florida for sure. And everybody had money to burn, and even $300,000, even to us, and a couple of us guys, that's a weekend's, long weekend of bar money, in Miami, 300 grand just to get rid of it. Because we have more time. But I could take $300,000 to South America and buy 30,000 pounds of Colombian redbud. And that's what people were, basically craving at that time. Now, if I can take $300,000 of some cocaine cowboy's money, and in the voyage between South America and South Florida at that time, with, when you're making your way through the lower Caribbean and then through what we call the Yucatan Pass, the gap into the Gulf of Mexico, typical voyage, barring any other weather patterns, 8 days. So if I could take your $300,000 in 8 days, turn it into 15 million at the least, dude, you're not shooting at me. Yeah. You can't give me money fast enough to go back, because if you take that math and go just a little bit further with it, what you get is this. You get $15 million minus $5 million. So that for a job that size is about what I would cost for me to do that. $175 a pound is what I charge. For whatever you want, you pay me $175 a pound. Well, $5 million of that 15 is mine. So you made $10 million off of $300,000 in 8 days. What that means, quite simply, is you take that original $300,000 and divide it back into $9,700,000. You want to take that original investment out, even though they got it back. This is easier math to do. 300,000 divided by 9,700,000, and you get the number 32. And what that number 32 represents is the number of chances I have to get your next load to you before you've lost money. So quite simply, I could lose 31 of those 32 loads, but all I have to do is get that last 30-second load to you. You've still made money. You haven't lost money yet. That's the ridiculousness of the mathematics and the cost and the price of doing business in those days. That's why when people say violence, well, aren't you scared of going in there? Well, hell no. They loved us because we were paying them, outrageous amounts of money for a plant that just grows, stupidly wild about everywhere in Colombia, northern Colombia in those days. They're happy, I'm making $175 a pound off of you just for moving your shit, and I don't have to sell it. I don't have to. When we never did want to fuck with it, we never wanted to own it. We never wanted to sell it. Be that. Now you're involving way too many people. That being said, don't confuse that with the loyalty and the trust and the understanding that took place between half of a town's population, 250 plus people, and kept a secret for nearly 40 years. Nobody had a clue. I mean, that in itself is wildly amazing and cannot be in any way contrasted toward, the method by which I said we didn't want to own it or sell it because you're involving too many people. Well, you're involving too many people in different places of the country and people you don't know. We were all family. Everybody in the town knew everybody. The other half that wasn't involved in it knew everybody was doing it. I mean, they're not stupid, but who's going to tell on your neighbor? Even the sheriff himself, C.W. Sanders, he wasn't a stupid man. He knows what's going on because every now and then he'd get a little bit here or there. Somebody would fuck up or something like that. I mean, of course, we never got away. Everybody didn't get away scot-free. Some guys got busted in a van load or some shit like that, but, minor stuff. But in those days, it was more of a slap on the wrist. You get caught with a van load of this shit or even on a boatload of it, you might federal government might give you 18 months in prison or, 14 months in prison, of which you would do maybe 8 or 9 because of the good game time and all that kind of stuff there. And, the bosses and the people running the show at that time would literally just, get the family fed, get the, the lights on and the, rent paid if there was rent or mortgage or whatever like that. And when you got out of prison and come home, you just go right back to work again. That was just that stupid. But there were a lot of things involved and a lot of moving and mechanical pieces, which is what made this operation, after all, described by the government as one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations ever discovered here in North America. Simply because, being family and generational and having been kept this secret for all these years, was hard for people to even imagine, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners are going to find what I'm saying hard to imagine. But all I can do, quite simply, is impart to you how I grew up in this industry and what I actually saw and what I viewed as a kid growing up. And since having written the book, and then even during the writing of the book, I didn't self-publish. I have a literary agent, which was a difficult process by which to get. And I was published by St. Martin's Press, which is, originally they're from London, from St. Martin. And when I was considered by St. Martin's Press as being one of their authors, I got on the phone with their publisher, Susan Robinson. I was on with their senior executive editor, their executive of sales, executive of paperbacks, and there was another executive of some kind of shit in there. Well, my agent at Foundry Literary Media was freaking out because he'd never had the publisher on fucking, on a call. He says, don't get freaked out. I said, dude, get him on the phone. I got this, So here we are on the phone. And the only thing that the publisher, I was asked questions, from the other guys and shit like that, but the only question that the publisher herself, Susan Robbins, asked me was in regards to validation. She says, because the stories that you talk about, the sheer volume and amounts of money that you talk about are so outrageous. She said, do you have validation? Can you validate this? And I said, well, let me see. Who would you like to speak to? I can put you in touch with the FBI, Secret Service, CIA, FDLE, Customs, the local Naples Police, Sheriff's, Trident Task Force, any of these people you want, I can get them on the phone for you right now if you'd like. She goes, perfect. That's all she said, because quite simply, I wouldn't have believed this myself had I not lived through it. And your subscribers and your viewers and anybody that may be watching this or passing it along, please don't take my word for this shit. Look it up. It's online. It's on the internet. There's no secret to this shit and how it took place and where it took place and the sheer volume in which it took place. The 4 guys that we grew up with, the 4 fathers whose kids I grew up with, the Daniels brothers, just to give you for instance, another bit of scope or another point of view, if you will, to put things in perspective. Now, when they had finally gotten arrested, the United States government instituted 2 operations, federal operations in the 80s, called Operation Everglades 1 and Operation Everglades 2. Both operations involved over 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement across North America. And the first time they came down there to start effecting arrests for the smuggling that was going on, that they had finally got, in tune to. Once they did away with the cocaine cowboys in Miami, they kind of turned their sights on us and said, well, let's check this out over here. So cocaine cowboys pretty much screwed us in Miami. Let's put it that way. But the the intelligence was such at that time by the older generations, the first and second generations, that they had judges and congressmen and senators and that people on their payroll. So they knew this operation was coming 2 weeks before it happened. So when they were rolling into that little island and shut things down, it was a pitiful, it was a joke, actually. It was quite the failure, it was quite the failure because everybody took off. Nobody was around, So almost a year to the day, here they come with what they call Operation Everglades 2. So now their people are telling them, their senators and judges are telling them, look, they're not going to stop, man. They're going to continue this process. So I think it's time. So what the older generations did in 1984 was just sit back on their front porch at 2 o'clock in the morning and smoking cigarettes and wait for the show to start, and here they come, another 250 agents, and they came out swarming on that island. Not only did that, this time there were more reporters that showed up to report what was going on than there were people being arrested. And it actually there was a very current and a very popular magazine, still is, Life magazine here in the United States. And one of the reporting agencies was Life magazine, and they put out I'll send it to you. Remind me, I've got a list of things that I'll send to you. It was a unprecedented article as it was 18 pages in length, and it took up an entire centerfold picture within the magazine. It was an overview of the 10,000 islands, and it shows you this labyrinth of islands, this beautiful, wonderful labyrinth that Mother Nature saw fit to build right in our backyard. And the headline across the top said, "Trouble in Everglades City." And the subtitle underneath, now they got the population a little screwed up. They said there was 600 people, but what they said was, a small Southwest Florida town tarred with drug smuggling, and most of its 600 residents said, "So what?" And then it went on to tell the story about, the whole crap that was going on. So if you doubt anything that I say, God bless you. That's cool. I don't care. But look it up. If you want to comment and make a response, please do a little bit of homework before you trash me, because I'm just simply, I'm that 25-year-old kid. Obviously, I'm in a 65-year-old rapper. I'm a 25-year-old kid, man. And, it just came from here and went right onto the pages of that book, and, there's so much to this story. And a lot of it's, amongst the joviality and the way in which I tell the story, because you're getting Tim, you're getting me, but fuck it, you're getting the real guy. I wrote every word that you read. And once you've heard my voice, and if you read that book now, you'll hear my voice come through the pages. And all I can do is honestly impart to you what I learned and what I lived at as a kid, and how it was. This is as big a surprise to me as when I first started as it is to you hearing this, obviously. But like I said, along with the joviality in which I like to tell my stories, it doesn't belie the seriousness of what it was we were doing. We were risking our asses every time. When I'm short on a boat, man, there's no doubt about that. But you can't carry that attitude with you. If you carry an attitude along with you like that, eventually you're going to start, doing this kind of shit, and you're going to fuck up. So never once did we ever was I scared. People ask me, "Were you scared of doing that shit, man?" Like that. So no, because we were, first of all, kids, and the adults were in control. We were the crewmen on all these boats that were doing this bust-ass, ball-ass fucking work. We were the ones sent offshore to handle the bales and move these 800 or 1,000-pound motherfuckers 2 and sometimes 3 times a night. You think the adults are doing this shit? Hell no, man. They're going, hey. Everybody in town was working, and that's the reason why. But like I said, and the seriousness, and it should, the joviality should not belie that seriousness. But, it's just me, because I'm that guy, and I'm going to tell you just exactly how the fuck it happened, And when we talked earlier about, I have to tell you, this is a rather funny story, about the coinage of the term square grouper. And when you throw a bail or you lose a bail, and that happened a lot, and it didn't happen because, on purpose. A lot of times it happened, and these bales would wash up on the beaches here in Southwest Florida. People be, walking along shelling and shit, and all of a sudden there's a bale of weed laying there on the beach, and it happened quite frequently in that way, simply because we were loading these boats with so much shit that, if there was any kind of swell on the water, as the boat's going through the water, it's doing this. Mm-hmm. And every now and then one might, roll and go off the edge. Who the fuck knows? And then eventually it'd wind up on shore. That was what square grouper was. Mm-hmm. Not only with that, and like I said earlier, and I'll always insist on this in people understanding that we weren't the only pot haulers around, dude. There was pot haulers all over the fucking place, even on the West Coast, and God bless their asses. But we were the only ones that were able to integrate it into a way of life spanning that period of time and lasting through 3 generations. And there were other pot haulers, like I said, sometimes they'd get spooked or something would happen and they would, the thing was to just throw that shit off the boat. Maybe your contacts didn't get out there to you early enough to get it off of you in time before the sun come up or whatever the case may be. But, they'll throw that shit right there on shore. Throw it right off the boat, get rid of it and get away from it as fast as you can because the fucking sun's going to come up, and they're not messing around. So, and that happened from time to time. But one time in particular where we had taken some time off, a couple of days off from hauling pot and unloading boats and shit like that. So we're actually, and these boats that we're working actually have to work. You can't justify, filling a boat with fuel and bait and paying a crew if your boat's not living, is not bringing catch in. Mm-hmm. So we would do stone crabbing by day a lot of times and haul pot at night because the boat had to continue to work. Well, on our off days, we're often, we're in the bunk sleeping and, we're on our way to the fishing ground that we're going to that morning. And this particular time, Captain Billy's daddy, Hubert, was running the boat. And I remember him, I'm sleeping, he pulls the throttle back on the boat, he turns around and he's kicking my bunk. I'm in the bottom bunk, Mark's in the top bunk, and he's kicking the bunk with his foot. He's going, "There's bales out there, boys." The minute we heard that, we sat up, put our fishing boots on. And all we're dressed for every day is we're dressed in cut-off jeans, and we've got on a pair of socks and fishing boots, crab boots. That's all we wear. That's our work uniform. Mm-hmm. We ran out on deck, and the sun is just coming up, and the water is slick, calm as glass, dude. And as far as you could see, there was shit floating everywhere. I mean, it was like it had just happened recently because a lot of them were floating rather high out of the water. The more the stuff sits, and it's depending on how well it's packaged, depends on how much saltwater intrusion it'll get, and eventually it'll float slower and lower in the water the more saturated it gets. Mm-hmm. But we had gotten there probably not too much longer after it had gotten thrown overboard because we actually had the opportunity to pick. I mean, our boats were plowing through them. That's how many of them there is. Wow. And we were actually able to just, weave in around and pick up the ones that were floating really high out of the water because we knew they had the less saltwater intrusion than any of the rest of them. So we had to pick of the litter. We were the first ones there. And, we're throwing this shit. I mean, Mark's grabbing, I'm grabbing, he's throwing, we're throwing, and we're not even counting how many of these fucking things are picking up, right? So while we're doing that, Hubert's on the phone, or on the radio, actually, on a sideband, calling back to the hill, we call it. It's where we dock the boat and keep our traps. We call that the hill. And Billy lived right there, Hubert's son, Captain Billy. Mm-hmm. And he's calling for him to bring another boat out to get this shit from us and, take it into the woods so we can, get out of here. So it wasn't, we weren't only several miles downshore when we started running into this shit. So it didn't take Billy long to get out there. So while we're waiting for him to come out, Hubert's done with a call. He sticks his head out of the wheelhouse and he looks at the deck and he goes, "That's enough." Fucking much, he says. Throw some of that shit back in the water. We had over 200 pieces by that time stacked up there on the boat, right? I mean, in a big pile. So we start shucking them back into the water. And the reason that was because the boat Billy was coming out to get, the stuff from us, and it can only take so much. I mean, we can't overload that fucking thing. So I think we threw back all but 100. And keep in mind that each one of these things is worth anywhere between 25,000 and 27,000 US dollars a piece. These bales, we got 100 of them. Do the math. At 25,000 a piece, that's 2.5 million per 100 pieces. We want 100 pieces. If it's 27,000 each, that's $2.7 million we just found on the way to work that day. My cut, after we took it, Billy took it, put it into the woods. We stashed it. He made a call. It was sold 2 nights later. It was gone. That day of work, I made $641,000 on the way to work that day. That was my cut. We cut it 4 ways. Captain Billy and Captain Herbert, Hubert, and Mark and I each got $641,000 just on our way to work one day. So once Billy took this shit from us, we got the fuck out of there and away from that shit, man. And we're headed down to where our traps were, and we start our day's work. You know, we're working, we're pulling, and we get it in. Here it comes about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden we've seen these little boats coming up to us, guys from town on. I'm like, where's this yelling? Where's this shit at? And they're like, it's 3 miles, 4 miles that way. You better hurry up and get out there. It's been there for a while, because somebody somewhere, once you find, like I said earlier, once, somebody finds shit like this, they get on the radio, Square Group or anybody in town with a radio and a boat hears that, they're out there, man. They're looking for this shit. It's just free money. I mean, it's free shit. Once somebody throws it into the water, it belongs to whoever can fucking pick it up. That's just how it goes. We wound up picking up 100 of them. We could have got way more than that, but we couldn't take, we didn't want to risk sticking around. We had, $641,000, I think, wasn't bad day's pay. But that's just how it was when I was a kid growing up. These ridiculous amounts in 30 ton, 40 ton, 50 ton, 60 ton, that's all I knew. That's all any of us knew. So we didn't question it. We didn't think anything of it. So when I start writing this book, they're, the guys that I grew up with and shit, they're wondering, who the hell would want to hear about that? And I was always the guy, because I took over the fucking shit eventually. I was always the one able to think outside the box a little bit. And I said, look, you'd be surprised who'd want to hear about this shit, man. Considering what we had to go through and all this, after having ultimately it all came to an end, with what they called Operation Peacemaker. But this is almost 10 years down the road now. I've been doing this, but late 1984, I was fortunate enough, if you prefer, to be in a position to all of a sudden be able to make the call, to get the crew working again, to get the connections together to make the crew work. And the reason that was made possible was simply just a matter of sheer happenstance. Almost a year prior, now, I told you the scenario by which we get it to Miami. So that's done. We developed what the law enforcement now describes here in the States as a dead drop. That means you drop the vehicle, you get out of it, and you walk away from it. That's a dead drop. And now, during that 28-night run that I alluded to earlier, one of the nights we had worked, we decided we brought in 55 tons, 110,000 pounds in a single night, just to see if we could do it. Because by that time it wasn't about the money. I got to, I'll tell you about that too. But it was just about, seeing how much we could get away with. We got 55 tons one night, but I can distinctly remember, we worked 3 days in a row, and we take off, then we work some days. Well, during this off period, after this 55 tons, the next day, I was off. And I just got up and I wound up walking over to one of the 5 houses that we had stuffed full of shit, man. At one point on the island, every house that was on the water on the island had shit in it. That's how much stuff we were moving. And I'm 3 days prior to my working that 3 days, and I was part of that 55-ton job, one of the oldest of the 4 brothers, Randall, or was Daryl, actually. I think it was Daryl again, the guy that was flying a fucking airplane. He sees me. I walk over to the house one day to see how things were going, and shit, having worked that night, and that 55 tons. And he said, he pointed to 3 days prior to that. Let me go back. 3 days prior to us working that job, including that 55 tons, he gets me and my buddy Jimmy, pulls us aside and hands us a wrecking bar and a chainsaw. And he points over to this brand new motorhome, Winnebago motorhome that had 125 miles on it. Brand new. Most of those miles were driving it from where they bought it to the Everglades. That's what, that's how new it was. I want you and Jimmy to go inside that thing and strip every goddamn, take the sink, take the bathroom, take the walls, take the, everything you can strip out of there from the windows down. Leave the cabinets and the curtains and everything else alone. But from the windows down, gut that bitch. Take it out of there. Take the plumbing out of it. Take everything. We even took the captain's chairs and the passenger chair. We bolted them, threw them out the fucking door. And what they wound up doing was taking airbags and putting them in the springs, in the suspension, and inflating those airbags. So when they put nearly 12,000 pounds, almost 6 tons of weed in this motorhome, it wouldn't spark the highway with driving it down the road, right? Those bags in the springs would tighten up and it wouldn't allow that thing to squat. So you'd never know it was loaded like it was. Well, we worked this 55 tons and they decided they're going to load this motorhome with this shit. So I, like a dumbass, I just, I got a day off. So I walk over and I see their shore crews loading cars and they kick the bumper when they're loaded and they take off because nobody's touching these vehicles. So nobody wants to put fingerprints on them. So Daryl looks at me and goes, "Timmy, come here." And I kind of rolled my eyes and my inner monologue, I'm going, "Oh, fuck." And he says, "I need you to do me a favor if you would, please." He said, "I need somebody that I can trust." He said, "I'd like you if you would." He says, "You take that Winnebago and drive it over to Miami for me." He said, "Because quite simply, it cannot go to the plaza where everybody else is going because, damn, you get within 40 feet of this thing, you can smell it, right?" So he said it has to go directly to the stash house. It has to go directly to the spot where all these other loads are being taken from the plaza. No one had ever been there. And the reason for that was because of the dead drop. And because the guys that were bringing it to Miami to the plaza didn't know where it got loaded. So they could, even if it got busted, they couldn't tell them where it came from. And the guys in Miami didn't know where it was coming from Everglades, and guys in Everglades didn't know where it was going in Miami. So there was a buffer. That was our buffer point, as it were. Well, no one over the years, particularly the crew, except for the adults, and there was only like five or so of them that were putting these deals together, that even knew any of the Cuban counterparts that actually owned the stuff on the other side in Miami. We never met them as kids. Nobody ever knew these people. Nobody ever knew where it was going. But I got chosen to drive this thing straight to this place where nobody had ever been, except for the adults. I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, I'll give you $35,000 just to drive it." And it was only a one-way trip. I didn't have to drive anything back. I drove money back. And I said, "Hey, okay." Only because of who was asking me to do this did I do it. So here I am. I climb up into this thing. And we literally, because we took the seats out, we had to pull a bale out so somebody could sit down. I could sit down there in between them and drive this damn thing. No seats in the thing. So here I go, 2-hour drive across Miami, and they're telling me on the radio how where to turn. I get off Chrome Avenue, where to turn. I'm going through this orange grove, and here, out of nowhere, pops out this, I shit you not, this medieval castle-looking house. It even had the spires. I mean, it looked like old English shit, dude. I mean, that's what it looked like. It was so out of place, and it was built by some ignorant cocaine cowboy. Obviously had more money than he had brains, right? So I pull this Winnebago in there, and I stop next to the house, and they immediately start grabbing it and taking it, to a cellar under the home. And I was told to stay there the whole day till the loads stopped coming that day, and they would give me a car with money in it to drive back for them. That's where you needed this trust thing to happen. So I stayed there all day. I did that, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, Operation Everglades 1 and 2 come along after that. And next thing you know, these guys are gone. The brothers and everybody that was working, us kids, or everybody else for that matter in Southwest Florida almost, were gone to prison, and the work stopped. So a month or so goes by, and I've got a house. I got several houses, and I'm living in a little town just east of here called Golden Gate. And I get a knock on my door one afternoon, and I opened up, and there's this guy, Jorge. I met him at this house I was at. He goes, Timmy, you know, because we got to know each other so well. I mean, everybody winds up calling me Timmy, you know. So he's like, Timmy, he says, he says, I found you. He said, it took them a month to find me because all they knew was Timmy and this mug.
Mm-hmm.
And Everglades and Naples isn't all that big a place. So it took them a month. They said they're looking around and asking and this and that. This guy, Timmy, from Everglades. And they found out where I lived, and they knocked on my door. And first thing he says to me before he greeted me was, he goes, Timmy, he says, we got work to do. It's backing up. He says, can you do this? And I didn't even hesitate. I said, yeah. And I knew how to do it from A to Z, from how to get it offshore, to get it onshore, to get it to Miami. I knew that whole scenario. Mm-hmm. And I could reverse engineer the cost because having had worked each position over the almost decade that I had done that, or, at that time, the 6 years that I had done this, I knew what each person was getting paid because at different levels, you're of a hierarchy within this sophisticated operation are different levels of pay. Mm-hmm. The highest of the paying level is like when I began. You're going offshore to unload the vessel and bring that entire load in. I'm paid anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a night to do this because at that point in time, there's only 3 people in charge of the whole load for about 6 or 7 hours. 3 people in charge of that load. So we're getting the pay. We're risking our ass out on the water for this. The boats that come to get it from us, they're $30,000 a piece. So out of that $30,000, the captain will pay his guy that he's got on the boat with him. Now you have to pay the guy in the house. Guy that owns the house that you're putting the shit into. Then you have to pay the drivers or the drivers of the vehicles that are taking the shit to Miami are anywhere from $30,000 to $35,000 a piece too. And there's 40, 50 of them. So I could reverse engineer all the costs and the bail handlers. They're $5,000 a night. They're $10,000 a night. Or the spotters, they're $5,000 a day. I could reverse engineer and put this all together, but I did not know where to go. Who do I talk to? How much do I spend? How much do I charge? All of this was known only by the older generation. So by that time, some of the guys that were busted during that first operation wasn't successful, but they did round up some people. So some of the older generations, I had their ear. And I said, look, explain to me, tell me. And that's how I learned $175 a pound. Then I was introduced to a connection in Jamaica. I was introduced to who I call in my book the boss, who I bought millions upon millions of pounds of Colombian marijuana from in Colombia. I had connections in Central America, in Panama, all around the Caribbean, and where they were inherited to me by these older generations that wanted to see the work continue. So not only did I put the Everglades guys back to work, there's the next island up, which is Goodland. Then the next island town next up is north is Marco Island. And then there's Naples. And then an island north of Naples is Pine Island. I ultimately wound up working 5 crews, anywhere from 50 to 70 people on each crew. And we were I started off by the first time I went to Colombia. And this story's in the book, and it's a funny story. I wound up doing 32,000 pounds as a test run. I got that in, no problem. Got to Miami, next thing you know, here we go. Now, the work's picking up. Now, because of, and this is where you might want to bring me back to, my first trip to Colombia, and meeting the boss and what I went through with that. Now, in the earlier years, the evolution of what a bale of pot looks like is what I'm going to describe to you. In the earlier years, when I first began, they were coming to us. They weren't compressed like a bale of pot is. If and we'll put up a picture of what they look like. Oddly rectangular, about 80 pounds a piece, all uniformed, all the same size, all the same weight. That didn't occur in the earlier days. In the earlier days, they were more like stuffed with their foot or hand compressed with a crank, and then the plastic bag duct taped shut, stuffed in a burlap bag, and that was stitched shut. So we were getting them like 40 pounds, 60 pounds, 100 pounds. I mean, they were coming all different sizes and shapes, no rhyme or reason. And because they weren't compressed, who knows how many times before we got them, they'd been handled. So some of them got holes in them, and there's seedy shit and shakes coming everywhere. It was a mess. It was a mess to the point where when we brought loads in and got them off onto the little boats and they were taking them into the shore, into the house or wherever they were taking them that I wasn't privy to at that time, we would have to go offshore, like I said, and clean our boat. Well, damn, we're taking hours and cracks and crevices to get every seed off the deck of this and everything off the deck of this boat, because if something should by chance happen to become suspect and they start running around out there looking and boarding and looking on boats and they find one seed on your boat, your ass is done, So this shit was coming to us nasty like this. And what ultimately we were doing was Captain Billy would take in a couple rolls of plastic, visqueen plastic. We would line the deck of our boat all the way from the stern up to the wheelhouse and over the edges and duct tape it up against it, make a bowl, literally a bowl out of the deck of the boat. Come on, I'm going to throw that shit on there, and then we get it off our boat and literally go offshore and just kind of pull it all up into a bunch on the top, wrap a chain around it and an anchor and throw it overboard. Boat clean. And that ended up having to we were quite literally sweeping it into piles on the deck, taking our ice shovel and scooping it up and throwing it overboard. I can guarantee you, Simpa, I've dumped more shake and more shit and more bud out of my boots than any 20 men can smoke in their lifetime. That's how nasty it was. But then later on comes in the early 80s, the advent of the commercial and household trash compactor. And one of the older generations went, boop, light went on. They said, okay, here's what you need to do. So they took about 4 of these compactors and a generator down there to the jungle and said, here you go. That was how the evolution of the bale changed from what it used to be, what we called pillow bales, into the compressed rectangular shaped bales that are typically seen on the television or the news or whatever now. Our older generations were responsible for that, having taken that course. So by doing that, what they did was they made it easier. They made it cleaner. Now the loads are more compact. Now the loads are heavier because you can put more on, you can stack more, so the advent of the compressed bale became, the increase in volume in what it was we were doing, in the industry as a whole. Not only that, they were picking it up in Jamaica and Central America, that same process, and it just propagated into Mexico. And when they talk about Mexican brickweed, brick is what they're talking about, that compressed bale that our older generations were responsible for creating. So back to Colombia. These guys wanted me, when I did my first job for Carlito and Leo, these two guys that I name in my book were my Cuban connection. I didn't want to know anybody else in Miami. Don't introduce me to anybody. I don't want to know anybody. You got somebody that wants shit from wherever the Caribbean they want their shit from, I can get it for them, but I'm going through you. You give me the money. I'll go get the shit. I'll bring it and give it to you. You take it from there. You pay me. Nobody else knows me. Nobody else knows me, wants to know me. I don't give a fuck who they are. So this is how we work. And as a result of that, it wound up working rather well. And in the fact that after that first trip to Colombia, which was not too long after Carlito and Leo, about 6 months after Carlito and Leo and I started working together, that we wound up pitching in together and buying at that time for just under $1 million a corporate Learjet that had it was only a couple of years old. It was just under $1 million, and I could take this plane, literally fly early in the morning. It's a 5-hour flight from South Florida to Colombia, where I needed to go, and I could spend the day there, buying and purchasing and looking at what it was I came to look at, and then fly out that afternoon and be back in the United States and back sitting across from my girlfriend at the bar by 9 o'clock that evening, and her never knowing I had left the country. It was just one of those things. But the first time I'd met the boss man, I didn't meet him that day. I took my buddy Rudy with me, who was a Cuban kid, and to translate, because the boss didn't speak a lick fucking English. Now, when you talk about family and generational, the guy that I went there to meet was the father of the first generation that our generations worked with. He inherited this plantation, and all these growers throughout northern Colombia, from Santa Marta to Cartagena, which included the Barranquilla Peninsula and Barranquilla City, a lot of different growers within those areas were all growing for him. That's why there was millions of pounds available. I mean, to whoever could come and get it, and we were coming and getting it. So I fly down there, and the jet lands on this airstrip, which is just carved out of the jungle. It's a dry clay airstrip, very well taken care of. This jet landed pretty easily on this little thing. So we're flying out over this sea of green, over this jungle, literal jungle. And off in the distance, you see this little speck of nothing, of white, of bare ground. And that's where that jet's going to land, right there. So we fly past this guy's house, this mansion on the side of the hill, which he inherited from his father. And we land and we go to the house and this and that. We go to an apartment and we're set up in the back, and we have dinner like that. So we can meet the boss man the next morning. He comes walking into the room, and we're with his partner, Rico. And Rico spoke English. So, the translations were okay. Everybody was cool with what was being said. And so we're standing there I'm having a glass of orange juice or whatever. And then in comes the boss man. And he's like 5'6", 5'7", kind of robust, a little bit rotund. Black hair, of course, pulled back into a ponytail and shit. And he had a camouflage fatigue pants on with combat boots and a belted sidearm and a pistol and a T-shirt. And on his T-shirt was like this. It had a smiley face. And underneath the smiley face, it said, "Have a nice day," in Spanish. And Rudy's reading it to me. So he walks past us. He walks over to the bar to get himself a drink, the breakfast bar to get himself a drink. And on the back of the shirt was that same smiley face with its X's in its eyes and a smoking bullet hole in its head. And underneath it said, "Or else." So on the front it said, "Have a nice day." It said, "Or else." That immediately cracked me up. And right away, I kind of had a sense of the guy that I was dealing with, because he was a funny guy. He was just as jolly as could be. He didn't have a care in the fucking world, of course. I mean, why would you at that time, And this is back at a time when there really weren't cartels in the fucking show. Of course, the Medellin cartel, and I only know that story, what happened to those people and the Aguileo brothers, who were the Cali cartel, only because the guy I was dealing with was their cousin. So we never had any direct cartel, connection at that time. We were working, but nevertheless, he owned the region. He had, every grower that he could get in that region working with him. And when I went down there that next morning, as we got introduced to the boss, and he just turned around and said, "Let's go see what you're here to see." And he go fast paced to the front door, opens the door, and before he steps out, he reaches over and grabs an AK-47 that's hanging on where you would hang your coats, hanging on the wall. He grabs that and goes, "Let's go." His buddy Rico walks out. He grabs an AK. Rudy, my buddy, grabs an AK. And I swear to God, the first and only time I ever handled a gun during this entire scenario that we're talking about, did I ever see a gun. The only time I ever picked one up and held one is because everybody grabbed one. I grabbed one too. Walked out the door, got in his Bronco, and we only drove about 5 minutes through the jungle. And as soon as Rico, the guy up front next to the boss man, opened his door, that smell of weed and burlap smacked me right in the face, man. I know that smell because I was born with it, And I left my gun in the car. I mean, the Bronco, because I'm like, carrying this fucking thing around. There's enough everybody coming up around here, right? So I'm pushing these, these big old leathery leaves out of my way, and all of a sudden it opens up, and I'm staring at what looks like an Incan ruin. There's bales of shit stacked 12 feet high, if it's a foot. They're about 20 feet wide, and they go about 50, 60 feet into the jungle. There's one stack that way, and there's one stack this way, and another stack this way. There's bales of shit, to choose from. And the boss man hands me a 6-foot piece of bamboo with a metal pipe attached to the end of it that's cut kind of like a hypodermic. And the reason for that being is that I can reach some of the bales that are up on top, and I'm sticking these things, and I'm pulling some out, and I'm using the boss's pipe to, smoke it, just it, taste it, see what it's like. And then I'm like, oh, I like that. That's nice. Yeah, I said, how many of those you got? Kick them all down. So he's got his guys kicking this shit down in front of me, and I've got, and Ruby's carrying a box of spray paint, and I'm spraying a particular mark that I use as a trademark on the bale, so I know that when it gets to where it's supposed to go, it doesn't have that mark on it. I didn't buy that shit. You know what I mean? So as I mark them, other guys are taking them off and they're weighing them. And when I get to the weight that I'm there to purchase at that time, day's over. We go back to the house, we shower, we clean up and this kind of shit. So just before dinner, we have our own apartment in the back. And the apartment actually was like 3 times as big as my house here in the States. It was a beautiful, just a beautiful mansion on the side of a mountain. And so here comes dinner time. We walk through the courtyard, this jungle, beautiful jungle, landscaped to have cocktails before dinner. And I'm sitting in the chair, and I'm sitting in the lounge chair, and the boss is sitting just opposite me in his chair. And our conversation's being translated back and forth between Rudy and Rico and like that, and all of a sudden, during our conversation, guy walks into the room, and then the guy walks away, and the boss puts his cocktail down, and he gets up and he starts walking toward the hallway, toward the kitchen. And I turn around and I'm looking and I'm watching him, and now he's fast pacing it to the kitchen. And I put my drink down and I followed him. I went to the kitchen onto the veranda, and he's almost in a sprint. Compound lights are facing inward toward the house from the jungle. So everything beyond the jungle is out of vision, out of sight. And he's running across the yard, and I'm right on his ass, man, because he's running. He runs in about 10 feet in behind the lights, ducks down into the bushes, and I go past him about 20 feet, and I dive like a sprinter off the starting blocks into this pile of bushes and shit. And I'm sitting there holding my head like this, waiting for all hell to break loose, dude. And I'm sitting there what seemed like an hour, but it was only just a couple of minutes. And, I kind of peeked up and I'm looking, and I could see the back of this boss's head because it's silhouetted against the light. And all of a sudden, this voice from the house is yelling out to the woods, Spanish. What the fuck he said. And this guy, the boss, starts laughing. A big belly laughing. I'm thinking, oh, my God, what the fuck is going on here, man? I'm getting pissed, right? So he's brushing himself off. He's back into the house. And by the time I get cleaned up and I'm back in there, he's already in his chair. He's got a new drink, and he's sweating profusely. And this minute I sat down and got my drink, he starts snickering. And everybody around him starts kind of snickering and laughing a little bit. And I'm like, I look at Rudy, and I'm like, what in the fuck what just happened? And Rudy's explaining to me, because the boss, man, he looked right at me as soon as I sat down, and Rudy tells me, the boss goes, where in the hell did you think you were going? He looks at me. I said, right off the top of my head, I said, dude, when the big man runs out of the fucking room, my ass goes with him. Just like that, right? I said, it only makes sense, but as it turns out, what was happening was, when we were flying in, we were scheduled to fly in, the boss never did business in front of his family. He's married. He's got 3 kids. He sent the wife and the 3 kids to the in-laws for the couple of days we were supposed to be there. And, so we wouldn't meet, like that. It was something that he believed in. And I literally believed in it too. And I kind of took his, his thought processing when it came to that. Of course, he's a family man. I mean, there's no shooting going on. I mean, it's not that kind of shit. This wasn't Medellin, this wasn't Pablo. This wasn't Griselda Blanco, none of that shit. So as it turns out, they're explaining to me, when that guy whispered in his ear, he says, your wife's coming up the mountain. He freaks the fuck out, and he dashes out of the room. And it turns out that he's got this party going on. I mean, there's bowls of cocaine in every room. There's everybody smoking weed, and there's hookers running around this house, and just beautiful women all over the place. And he doesn't want to be there. If that's his wife coming home, he didn't want to be there. He wanted to be somewhere else and vouch for her and let Rico take the fall for the fucking party, right? Well, as it turns out, they got it wrong. It wasn't his wife coming home at all. It's just a car that looked like his wife's was coming up the mountain, and the spotters that he has out there just freaked out. Said, it's the wife. And it got up that fast to the house. It's the wife. And he took off. That's when he asked me, what the fuck did you think you were doing? And next morning, I said, fuck this enough. I got on a jet and I flew home. But that was my first time of meeting the boss man. But yeah, it's just on and on. But Simpa, my friend, if you got anything in particular you want you want to
yeah, man,
about, or anything you're curious about, or
yeah, I kind of felt like I was watching a Netflix documentary or something there. I just got so engrossed. I was like, oh shit, I'm running a podcast. I've actually gotten to talk, and damn, yeah, I have quite a few points, or rather quite a few sort of questions. I think you've really concisely there covered quite a lot of sort of the story. I think what my audience would be interested in, what I'm also interested in, is that you've described the evolution of this, and now you're sort of top of the food chain, as it were. You've met, as you say, the boss man. You've got your own connections. Right. You've established your network. Obviously, domestically, the law's getting a bit shitty. Reagan's fucking being Reagan. Cocaine is doing what cocaine is doing in South America, is sort of evolving. How did that sort of impact? Because obviously in the notes I've got here that this all ended in 89. So what, I don't want to speak of like the downfall, as it were, but we're speaking of the highs here, as it were. We're obviously keeping abstract. But yeah, so what sort of led to the downfall, as it were? How come these good times ended? And yeah, that'd be my next question, really.
Perfect question. Perfect segue into the to the end of this quasi end to the story. Well, we had a good run. We had a great run over 3 generations. And when I ultimately took over, like I said, I was running 5 crews. And, the trust factor was such that even still at that time, very little was known about what was taking place, because it was, I mean, I'm even amazed at myself, now in retrospect, about how we were able to keep this secret, keep it, the enormity of what was taking place on the down low as well as we were able to. But that being said, the only way the United States government had to, by way of infiltrating, if you will, what it was we were doing. First of all, they had no idea to the extent it was taking place. That first of all. But one of the guys who was, a local, grew up a local, had been in this, industry as I was as a kid, and grew up and stuff like this. Now, when we're not doing work, there may be a lag in, in jobs or whatever like that, and maybe some time off that between jobs or whatever. I don't give a shit what these guys do. It's none of my business. When it comes time to work, you're there and you work. And this was always understood. Well, this case in particular, the guy, and I'm obviously not naming any names, he was in Colombia doing a cocaine deal on his own, just screwing around, and got busted. And he got put in a Colombian jail. And the United States government heard this guy was in there. Figured out he was part of the Everglades where he came from. He was that guy, maybe he knows something. They went down there and said, look, we'll get you out of this hellish hole of a prison. Here's what you need to do for us. Well, he bit. And they got him out of prison in Colombia, brought him back to the States and put him right back at home and right back to work. And none of us ever knew he was in Colombia. None of us ever knew any of this took place. But he wound up being, with regards to the part of our organization, was a chase boat driver. Mm-hmm. And chase boat, as I described, was the boat that rides along the load boat. He's the only guy in that boat. Mm-hmm. He's hired specifically to be the protection for the guys on the loaded boat. So he was privy to this particular job. Now, I was taking 57,000 pounds to an island just north of where we are right now. I'm in a little city called Fort Myers, and just north of us on an island called Pine Island. And I was splitting that 57,000 pounds, half to Pine Island and half to Everglades. So I had two crews taking the loads, kind of, relieving the burden from just one crew. And of course, he was the chase boat captain that was hired for the load boat coming in from Pine Island. So he knew about it right from the beginning. Hence, law enforcement knew about it right from the planning stages, a month before the job even took place. This is, it takes a little bit of time to coordinate things and make things all right, but we're moving and working at the same time. But when it comes time to do the job, they already knew about it, and they were watching, and they followed me to the Key West, to Marathon, where I'm looking for particular boats to work these jobs, because we're always sharing the wealth with different people. Mm-hmm. Not always using the same people. We're spreading around, letting everybody get some of the work. So I knew this. One of the guys in Everglades owned a fish house, a rather large fish house in Marathon in the Keys, Marathon Island. So we're using some of their boats, to work. So they followed me even down there. Well, the night that job was taking place, and we were up like I said, in Pine Island, and we're in the backwoods, on the back road in bumfuck nowhere land where nobody has any business being. But the locals knew of this spot that they could go back into that was an old overgrown, access way to a dock that was about half broken down. We can load there. So we backed the box truck all the way back through the woods to that dock. That's where our Pine Island, our northern half, was going to come to. And I didn't worry about the guys in Everglades because I grew up with those guys. I knew they had it, That's why I wanted to be with the Pine Island guys, because they weren't my crew. I just wanted to be, somewhat hands-on, if you will. Mm-hmm. Well, the load starts coming. Everything's doing great. We get probably 100, 200 pieces maybe. And all of a sudden, the boats quit coming. No more chatter on the radio. No more boats. Dead silence. A couple minutes goes by, and I've got a spotter out by the road, and he gets on the radio, and he says, Timmy, he says, a car just pulled in here with his lights on, backed out, and turned around and went back the same way it came. And right immediately, a chill went up my spine, and I'm thinking, that nobody should be out here. We're in the middle of nowhere. That guy's got no business being out here. Now, what the fuck is going on? So I'm running this scenario through this head, this inner monologue is taking off, and I'm walking out front because I want to hear for myself. So I get out front and I ask my guy again. I said, now tell me again what just took place. So as he's telling me, I turn around and look, and everybody that was with me back at the dock and the truck unloading that shit was right behind me because they didn't want to stay back there either, right? Because something was happening. We didn't know what at the time. So as he's telling me this, what he had heard and saw, you could hear the tire noise of what sounded like 20 cars coming down the road, but you couldn't see them because of the trees. Mm. And then as soon as we heard that noise, guys started taking off, right? And if you ran this direction, there was a huge pine tree forest that you could make your way through and run and just be gone. If you ran this way, there was about couple acres or so of what we call palmetto brush, which only grows maybe about 4 feet tall at the tallest, like that. So you'd have to run through that brush to get to the woods, Mm. And everybody takes off this way, except my dumb ass. I started running the other direction. I'm in the palmettos, and by that I get maybe 10 steps, 15 steps at the most into this shit, and I could see the headlights on the road. And I ducked down and I squatted down. I wasn't sitting down. I was down on my haunches like this, trying to get under the branches, and squealing, stopping, cars stopping, doors opening, and this Bronco, cream color Bronco, pulls into the little road that we pulled in on. And I can hear, there's some running that way. There's guys over there. I hear all these guys yelling at, chasing my people, right? But I could see this guy in the Bronco. I'm looking underneath the branches. I could see his shoes. Because when he opened the door, the interior light went on, and I saw him step out onto the ground. That's just how close I am to this fucking guy. He could spit on me. I'm right there. But at the same time, and it wasn't uncommon when these boats would come in from, say, Colombia or whatever like that, we'd get an illegal alien from time to time, a Colombian. He'd ride aboard, he'd come ashore, and he'd take off. We didn't care. None of my business. Well, so happens this Colombian dude came in on the last boat that showed up before they stopped showing up, and he's there with us, and he takes off running the same way I did. Only he didn't stop. He's still going, crunch, 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 and all these dry leaves, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, dude, stop running. Because if they go after you, he's going to run slap over me to get to you because I'm right there, right? And it was like a miracle. It just stopped. I didn't hear him anymore. So I'm thinking, okay, that's behind me. And here I sit. I'm listening to all of this taking place around me, all these voices and guys running and shit. And we're about 30 minutes before the sun starts to come up. I'm right there. I'm thinking, God damn it, man, I got to figure something out, because if the sun comes up, dude, they're going to see me. There's no hiding. I'm not even 15 feet away. I'm not even 4 meters away from this fucking guy, right? And so I watch the ground. I see him. He gets in his Bronco, and he backs out, and he goes down the road, takes off or something like that. But when he took off, I could hear another car was out in the roadway idling. But I didn't know how many people might have been in that car out there. So it wasn't really anything I could do. I had to sit there. Well, he came back in the Bronco, and he gets out, shuts his door, and apparently he begins to walk back to where our truck is, full of pot bales. Mm-hmm. And a voice from the car out in the street, and the street is only, I could toss a stone like that and hit his car. That's how close they were. Mm-hmm. And he yells to this guy in the Bronco. He says, "Where are you going?" And the guy in the Bronco goes, "I'm just going to walk back in there and, see what we got." And the guy goes, "Hang on, I'll go with you." And I'm thinking, damn, this is my break, man. So this guy, and they go walking. I give him about 2-3 minutes to get a good ways back into the woods, and the car's still running, though. And I'm thinking, and it was a police car, because I saw the guy's pants, I saw his pants go by. And I'm thinking, now it's almost like it's time to do something. It's fight or flight. And I'm thinking, if I look up over these bushes at that car and there's somebody still sitting in that fucking thing, he's going to see me. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to take off, and one of two things are going to happen. He's either going to shoot me, or I'm going to knock him the fuck out, and I'm going to take off. I have no choice. But I looked up over like that, and there was nobody in the car. Boy, I took off like a jackrabbit, man. I went across the road, through the ditch, and into the bushes, and into the jungle, and I was running. I ran till I couldn't breathe any longer. Dove under a pile of bushes and covered myself up with branches and leaves and all this kind of shit up to my face like this, and I laid there. And I was waiting to hear who was, if somebody was running after me. But, thank God nobody saw me. All those guys running around in there, nobody saw me cross the road and split, right? Mm-hmm. And once I felt comfortable about that, I laid there all day long, and I could hear the helicopter flying around. And I'd see it every now and then go over me, making its pass. I could hear these guys dragging my box truck through the trees, banging through the branches and shit, because it's only half full, right? And listening to this all day, and I'm laying there, and starts to get evening time-ish, early evening rather, and I'm laying there and I'm almost asleep, and I'm comfortable enough to kind of, because I've been up all of that day and all that now, almost 48 hours I've been up,
Mm.
So I closed my eye for just a little bit, and I hear these what sounded like a couple of footsteps, real close to me. The sticks and were breaking and leaves were crunching. So I opened my eyes and I looked. This way, and there's a goddamn bobcat. And this thing weighed it must have weighed at least 80 pounds. It was a big ass cat, dude. And it was like this, sneaking up on me like that, because it had seen my face motions, my face twitching, and my mouth, every now and then I do that. So it was curious at me. It was kind of creeping up on me. And now I'm thinking, just my fucking luck, man. I spent the last 48 hours, 24 hours dodging the law, and now I'm going to get eaten by this fucking thing. And I don't know what occurred to me. It just, all of a sudden, I just popped out of the bushes and the leaves and splattered like I yelled like that. This fucking thing leaped in the air and did about 3 flips, and when it hit the ground, it shot off into the bushes like it was fired out of a cannon and took off. And by this time now, it's getting to be dark time, and the following night, and I decide, shit on this. I got to figure my way out of this. So I start walking out toward the road, and I knew there was a fish house down the the road about 3 miles, and I could walk there. So I stayed off the road and walked through the trees along the side of the road because several cars and trucks had passed during that time I was walking. I just didn't want to be seen anywhere in the area, regardless. So I walk up to this, and it's like 2:30 in the morning, and the lights are on in the parking lot of this fish house, and inside the fish processing facility, the lights were on. And I thought, well, that's a little strange. What the fuck? So I'm picking the shit off of me and trying to clean up. But as I'm looking, the parking lot, and this is before cell phones, keep in mind, in the middle of the parking lot was a phone box. I guess that's what you call them in the UK, a phone box.
Mm-hmm.
And right out there in the middle of the parking lot. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't just walk out of the woods at 2 a.m. and walk right up to that thing and get on it. Somebody's going to ask a question, right? So I'm trying to sitting there deciding, how in the fuck am I going to get to that phone? Because that's my lifeline right there. That's my way home. That's my way to call someone to get my ass out of here, right? My only fucking chance. Otherwise, I'm walking my dick off, to get out of there for 20 miles, So while I'm going over this scenario in my mind, a shrimp boat pulls up to the dock next to the fish house. And that's why they were there. They were waiting for this boat to come in to unload its catch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they get the catch unloaded, and the crew, there's like 8 or 9 guys on this crew. So they all get in line. They're lined up at that phone booth waiting to make a call home. So I said, this is my chance again, dude. So I just kind of eased out of the woods around there, and I got in line with these guys like I'm part of the crew, right? So it got to my turn to the phone. First thing I did was grab the phone book, opened it up, found taxi, and I called the first number on the line, first number on the list. I called that guy. And I said, look, I told him where I was. I told him I was late. I said, I've been fishing for 3 weeks. I really, I want this ride bad. I said, I don't care where you are. Just show up. I'll give you $600 cash. Plus, I'll give you your fare if you just come and get me. I'm tired. I want to go home. And the guy said, oh, damn, okay. You sure about that 600? And I said, yes, I'm damn sure. But while I'm talking to this guy, the sheriff's deputy car pulls in real slow. It pulls into the parking lot, goes all the way around me, around the parking lot, real slow. Then it goes out another exit over here and then drives back off down the road. And I'm thinking, yeah, dude, just get your ass here. I get a ride, right? So I hung the phone up and let everybody else have their chance. It wasn't a half hour later. It comes this taxi, and this guy goes, and I climb in the back seat. I threw $600 bills in his lap, and I said, let's go. Take me to Punta Gorda to a hotel room, man. He said, I'm tired. And he drove me out of there to a hotel room, and that's how I got away. But it wasn't long after that. Here comes the investigation and all the kind of shit, because they knew who I was. They knew everything, what was going on and shit like that. They just had to pursue this a little further and question the individuals, that they suspect were involved in this kind of shit. Turns out the guy in the Bronco that I was talking about, he winds up being, ultimately I figure out that he is the resident field agent for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They are the most powerful law enforcement agency next to the federal government in the state of Florida. So their head of their agency, Ron, dude, his name just went out of my head. I can't believe that. But anyways, David Waller, I'm sorry, brain fart. He winds up being the guy in the fucking Bronco. So here I am, 30 years later, I get an email that says, "Hi, Timmy, how you doing? I hope you're doing well. If you need any help arranging speaking engagements, please don't feel free to reach out to me." And I'm thinking, there's no introduction, there's no name, and who the fuck is this email from? So I scroll to the bottom of the email, and there it is, right there, and it says, "David R. Waller, field agent, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, Lakeland, Florida," which is in northern Florida. Now he's in northern Florida. I'm thinking, hold on a minute now. So I type back real quick. He said, "You wouldn't happen to be the guy that busted me, are you?" Click. Didn't take 20 seconds. I got an answer back. He goes, "Yep, that was me." So we started conversing. We got one talking back and forth, and we just became the dearest of friends, man. I mean, it's hard to imagine. This guy chased me and wanted to put me away. Ultimately, when I was arrested by these guys, I was given. Well, the front page of the local Daily News, and we'll put up a picture of that too. We'll send that along as well. The headline reads, "Area part of a U.S. pot drag net." And it says, in the subtitle, it says 38 helped import over 150 tons. And then they give a street value of about nearly 160 million or some shit like that. And there's two pictures on the paper. One is a picture of one of my crewmen, Mikey Patent, being escorted out of the Everglades City Jail by this U.S. Customs officer on his way to the federal building in Fort Myers, about 45 miles away. And the other picture was a picture of just my buddy Jerry, my crewman Jerry, with handcuffs and walking like this. Well, what they didn't realize until after they started, 3 weeks or so into this investigation, that the 150 plus tons, nearly 400,000 pounds they were alluding to was only about a week's work. It didn't take them long to figure that out. That's when they realized all of a sudden, man, we got something here, right? So when it came time for my arraignment, I was given by this magistrate who you mentioned, Reagan. She was given her magistrate position by Reagan, President Reagan. And the only one that can revoke that position is another president. So she has this designation as magistrate for life. And she came in through the Reagan administration. And Nancy Reagan at that time was just say no. I mean, and marijuana was the scourge of America. No, they were just trashing the shit out of it. And I knew she was appointed by Reagan. So I'm thinking, oh, my fucking ass has had it, man. I'm gone, right? So as it turns out, I was given, when I was arraigned, she gave me 106. I had 4 indictments. Each indictment has 4 counts on them. Each count on the indictment holds a 10-year mandatory to life sentence. That's just one count. All 4 counts is a mandatory 40 years to life, and there's $1 million fine attached to each one. I had 4 indictments. I had 16 counts. 16 10 years to life sentences, 160 years mandatory to life, and $16 million in fines. And when she said that, there was 7 of us, me and 6 other my crew guys, being arraigned in front of the same magistrate that day. And my buddy Teddy standing right next to me, he goes, when she said 16 million, he kind of says under his breath, only so she could hear him, he goes, why don't you make it 30? 16 million, why don't you make it 30? He goes. And she looks down at me, she takes off her glasses, and and Teddy's going on about, you want to give us life in prison for, and we couldn't get that shit in here fast enough. He's trying to overtalk the judge. And we look at all of our attorneys in the row behind us and they're going, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. Like that's right. So the magistrate, she takes off her fucking reading glass and throws them down on her desk. And she looks me square in the eye and she goes, Mr. McBride, she says, you're in serious trouble, sir. She said, the men and the women of this country did not fight in World War I and World War II, or in Korea and Vietnam for you to mess it up with drugs. And that's right then when she said that, I knew my ass went like that. I knew I was in trouble, man. I was fucked. And she went on to say that I have a mission beyond my job to see this through, to see that this does not happen again. And I knew right away, we're done, we're gone. But had we known that the sentences were severe as they were, we probably would have stopped a year earlier, because it took, what they had done prior was, before changing the federal sentencing guidelines to what they're called as mandatory minimums now. And that was instituted in September 1st in 1987 for the sole purpose of ending Caribbean smuggling in Southwest Florida, because the sentences that were being handed out prior to us, weren't having any effect on the industry whatsoever. That shit didn't stop. It just kept coming and coming. They put our older generations in jail. We picked it up and the kids just took off with it. We upped the game. We had better boats. We had better technology. We had better counter-surveillance technology. We were using the same counter-surveillance technologists that the government and the law enforcement agencies in Miami were using, except we had more money and we could buy better. It is just as good, as not better, counter-surveillance technology. That was a crazy part about it. But she said, I have a mission beyond my job, and that's when I knew I was fucking screwed. So ultimately what wound up happening was, and the reason why I'm able to sit here and have this conversation with all you and all your amazing subscribers and viewers, is for the simple fact that the United States government had, because of the significance of what there was taking place and the amount of people that were being arrested, they discovered that now they're getting young men and young women, because that Life magazine article that was written that I had alluded to earlier had at one point talked about a small Southwest Florida town that was mostly women and young adults, because the entire male population's gone to prison. That just left us kids, but we were the infrastructure. So we hung around and kept on going. So what they weren't willing to do was, because there were so many of us, what they decided to do was, okay, we're going to give you this opportunity to cooperate, because if you got one indictment, you got a mandatory 40 fucking years without parole. That means you're doing 92% of your time, because they're only taking 52 days off your sentence every year after the first year. So you're doing the time, dude. You're gone. Plus you got this enormous fine on your ass. So along with giving them that, what they did was, because now they realize this is, they're down to the kids now. There's nothing left. And they said, if you cooperate with us, now there's a statute within the United States annotated codes. It was under Title 18, Rule 35, it's called, which is giving the government substantial enough cooperation where they can now sentence you below the mandatory minimum 10 years. They can give you probation if they deemed fit, but unless you cooperate, they're bound by that guideline to give you that amount of time. It's like a slide rule now. There's no more discretionary measures by the magistrates. So, but along with that, they were given immunity from prosecution from anything that they'd ever done, except for one count we're going to hold in reserve. So you can freely and openly tell us who, what, when, where, why, how, and everything you were involved with without any repercussions, as far as we're concerned. But we'll hold that one count where we're going to give you probation. We can give you a year. We can send you home if we choose to. That's your only out. So what wound up happening, and after researching and doing my own work and ultimately becoming friends with the United States Customs agent that was on the front page of that newspaper that I told you about, escorting my buddy to the federal jail. His name was John D.C., was United States Customs agent. He was now one of my dearest friends. We met in a gym in an LA Fitness working out about 6-7 years ago, and we just became the dearest of friends, man. It's just, I mean, it blows my mind to think about, but the guy chasing me and won't put me away for life is now one of my dearest friends, but this is how it worked out. Well, as it turns out, we were giving this deal to whoever would cooperate, because all this they wanted to do was, and the United States prosecutor told me this one day. She pulled me aside. She said, "Timmy, all we want to do is stop this. We just want it to end because we are done with it. We're tired of it, because they're not making any headway, man. I mean, they're spending billions and billions of dollars a year on this war on drugs, and they're not getting anywhere, So they said, look, what we got to do to stop this, because the sentences that were being handed out prior to this weren't having the desired effect. The guys were getting out, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, like I said earlier, because that's all they were guidelined for. But now they changed the guidelines, and none of us knew it. But what also took place was that they gave the opportunity to get out from under those life sentences if you would cooperate with us and give us some information about and tell us about this and this. Well, ultimately, what wound up happening was so many people were being arrested. So many names were being spoken of that the guys were literally going back to Everglades or wherever and saying, look, they know your name. They know who you are. They're going to get you. And if they take you and here's what we advise you take their offer, cooperate with them, get this immunity clause that they're handing out so you can tell them freely. But what the immunity did was it allowed them to tell on people and places and things and this and that while everybody else had immunity too. So what they said was tell on Jimmy, Teddy, and Willie and Johnny because they already have this deal. They've got immunity. You can't hurt them. Yeah. Follow the logic?
Yeah, 100%.
So that was by design rather than by accident. That was put in there for us to discover and for our attorneys to figure out, hey, this is your way out. So you can tell on these people and not hurt them. So everybody's telling back and forth on one another, but nobody's getting hurt over it. We're just getting out from under life sentences. So when it came to a guy like me, they want to know who's this guy's in Miami. Where are you flying off to in this private jet that we know you own? Where are you going? Well, I couldn't tell them that. I said, although we worked this for 3 generations, only one time did I ever see her put a gun in my hand for maybe 10 minutes, nothing violent whatsoever about it. And, you want to do this, you want to put us away for life for this kind of shit. And what ultimately, again, what wound up happening was the government recognized that. So that's why they, rather than by accident, but by design, gave us this option out. But when it came to me, I can't tell you about these guys. I can't tell you about Jamaica. I can't tell you about Colombia. I can't tell you about the 3 times I worked for the president of Panama in those days, Manuel Noriega. That's a story that I haven't told yet, but we could be on for hours telling that shit. But had I done so, even though we weren't violent in any way, shape, or form, you take one of these fucking guys and throw them under the bus, a Cuban, a Colombian, or, Central American or whatever, they're going to come back at you and do what they're absolutely very good at doing. And that is kill your mother, your dad, your brother, your sisters, the dogs, the cat, and even eat the goldfish, because this is what they do. And they would not hesitate to do such a thing. So I couldn't tell them anything. I said, I can't tell you shit. I'm sorry. So I wasn't able to take advantage of the tell everything clause and get out from under these mandatory minimums. What I was able to do, however, and once again, the reason why I'm able to have this conversation with you and your viewers is simply the fact that, first of all, they weren't willing to put kids, and that's what we were. I mean, I was 27 years old at that time, and I'm 65 now. And when I look back, 27, you're a kid. There's no doubt about it. They weren't willing to put kids in jail for life for something that their fathers and uncles and cousins and everybody else were only getting 8, 10, 12 months ago, a year ago. Yeah, we were getting 8, 10, 12 months for a year ago. They're willing to make that leap and put their kids in prison for life for something that their dads and moms got away with for 8 months and 10 months in prison. So they gave this out. My only way and my only salvation came by way of two Treasury agents came to me one day and they pulled me out of my jail cell in Fort Myers. I was in 10 months in federal lockup. Took me out of the building and around the corner to the federal building, and I was shackled with my wrist. I was belly chained. I was shackled to my belly chain. I had shackles on my ankles and a chain running from my belly to my ankles. They had me knotted up, buddy. And I'm doing what's called the convict shuffle, because your feet can only go so far apart because of the chains, right? And I'm all bundled up like this, and I'm saying, good morning to everybody on the sidewalk as we're passing, right? They take me in this room where this man and this woman Treasury agent with two identical brown vested suits on. And they put me in this little tiny room like a phone booth with a little thing in the window that you could talk at. And they came up to the window and they slapped their little gold badges, it's Treasury Department badges, against the window. And I went, oh, fuck, just like that. And the United States prosecutor, Susan Daltuva, was in the next room listening and watching over CC. Excuse me. She comes bolting through the door. She goes, no, Timmy. She says, this is not what you think it is. And I said, well, Susan, why don't you tell me what I think this is? Because if this is about cooperation, I said, you can just open that door and take me back to my cell and take me back home, because that ain't happening. She goes, no. She says, what we would like, and if you're willing to tell us, is how you were able to do this for a decade and we couldn't catch you. And I said, well, fuck, I can tell you dumbasses. Game's over, so why not? But I won't give you any names. I'll impart the scenario to you just as much as I have to you. Mm-hmm. And if you can glean anybody or anything out of that, then God bless you. Take their asses and have at it. Because I was paying off Marine Patrol officers. I was paying off sheriff's deputies. I was paying off anybody that would take money. We were paying them off and like that. I said, but I won't tell on them, Mm-hmm. But if you can figure it out on your own through what I might tell you about the process, then, okay, whatever. Well, that wound up ultimately being a saving grace of mine, because they didn't ultimately consider that substantial enough cooperation, because they wanted the Cubans in Miami. They wanted my connections around the Caribbean. Where are you going? They always want the big guy. They always want to go to the source. Well, it wasn't getting there by me. And so that's why I said, I can tell you how fucking stupid you are. And I said, first couple of questions I told this federal agents, this man and this woman, were, I said, do you know the geography of Everglades City? And they both looked at me and they said, oh, yeah. And I said, okay, how many roads into that little island and how many roads out of there are there? And they both looked at me and said, well, there's one. And I said, yeah, one fucking road. And I said, now, how many roads are there from there to Miami? One. And I said, yes, there's one goddamn road. And I said, how do you think we got all those millions of pounds of weed from that little island to Miami? I said, I can guarantee you they didn't get there on the backs of pelicans and fucking porpoises, man. They went right down that one goddamn road. And 99 times out of 100, my people are waving at you as they're going past, because who in their right mind would ever suspect that 40 tons of shit's coming out of this little island almost every day? Nobody. Nobody would ever suspect such a thing. And I'm talking about the money. I'm talking about, like when I bring a job in for you, I don't get paid right away. This is another common misconception. I don't get paid right away. It's not give you your shit, give me my money. If I bring your shit in for you, and let's just say you owe me $20 million for having done so, I'll send all the load to you except $20 million worth of it. I'll put it over here in a house over here in somebody's house and keep a hold of it. And 99 times out of 100, that house was the mayor's house. You want to beat that? So if you pay me $10 million of what you owe me, I'll give you $10 million of your shit. You pay me my whole $20 million, I'll send all of the $20 million of shit that I'm holding on to you. Because I have to get paid out of that load once it begins to sell. So it could be 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, or 3 before I start to see money. But in the meantime, I'm keeping my $20 million worth of shit, because you lose your shit. I make one phone call and that shit's gone and we're getting paid. That's just how it worked. So there would be times in which, 2 or 3 jobs of pay would come in, And I'd be over there trying to count 40 million, 50, 60 million dollars in a money house in Coral Gables that had hundreds in this master room, 50s in this master bedroom, 20s in this bedroom, 10s in this one, and the 5s in an 8-car garage out back. Because if you've ever seen $1 million in $5 bills would fill this room behind me, just about, And I wound up ultimately realizing that I'm counting money for days on end when I should be in Colombia, or I should be in Jamaica, or I should be somewhere in the Caribbean buying weed, or I should be helping my crew or doing something. But I was sitting in this fucking house counting money with 6 money machines we got from Bank of America from Miami that are just going constantly counting, and we're banding and ledging and shit. And guys are going in and out of rooms with laundry baskets full of $100 bills, full of $50 bills, because I can't take all one denomination. I have to get paid in all different denominations, because some poor fucker will ultimately wind up with that 8-car garage full of fucking $5 bills, and nobody wants that, right? But so that being said, we ultimately discovered, like a lot of the guys that during those days, was to weigh the shit, because every bill, regardless of its denomination, weighs a gram. Well, there's 28 of those in an ounce. There's 16 of those in a pound. So beyond that, it's just math. So all we have to do is pay attention to what denomination we're throwing into the basket and start weighing it. For instance, 110 pounds in 20s is $1 million. So now we're just weighing. So instead of 5 days to count $50 million or so, it's only taking me an afternoon. Just weigh it and pour it out. But it would take me longer to get the pay home back to the other side of the state, that 120-mile trip across back to Everglades. It would take me sometimes it would take me longer to get the money home than it took to get them their pot to them. That's a lot of money. And we're talking about literally thousands of pounds of money, tons of money. And you just don't put that in the back of your car and drive home with it, because the car ain't going anywhere, man. You see these movies about, crooks running around with a big old bag of money and it's swinging there, jumping over fences and shit. Bullshit. That fucking thing's heavy, man. They got a rope and they're dragging that fucker behind them, I'll guarantee you. I picked up a Samsonite suitcase one day that was full. It had $600,000 in mixed different bills in it. And I reached down to pick it up and pulled the handle right off the fucking thing. I couldn't move it.
Fucking hell. Wow.
So that's all part of all of that.
Yeah.
But when I'm telling these people this and they're interviewing me, they decided, fuck it. So one day they take me out to interview me, and they go past the room that I typically go into, and they open this door to the smaller room, and there's one guy in there with a polygraph machine, a lie detector machine. They put me on this thing and questioned me because they weren't believing the stories that I was telling them. The amounts I was describing to them, and the sheer volume of money I was describing to them that was beyond their comprehension. They weren't believing. They thought I was lying to them. When I got done with that test, I walked out of there grinning my ass off, and I turned around and looked, and they were all scratching their fucking head going, damn, he wasn't lying. I passed that fucking thing with flying colors. So ultimately that's, what wound up happening was me describing them how it was done, this and that. And I came before the magistrate for my sentencing. Now my $1.2 million attorney out of Baltimore had worked a deal whereby I could not get sentenced to more than 20 years. But because of what I described to them wasn't considered substantial enough cooperation, they couldn't give me less than 10 on the one count that they held back. So the judge at my sentencing thanked me in appreciation for the invaluable information into the insight into my world that they had no clue of, and decided that the 10-year mandatory would be enough sentence for me. So I got 10 years mandatory in federal prison, dispensed by this federal judge. And along to bring the story to conclusion.
Sorry,
that regard. No, go ahead.
I am desperate for a piss, so I was just going to pause it for 2 seconds, run at the loo, and come back if that's all right.
Okay, all right.
I'll just start recording in. Yeah, apologies about that. The last sort of 5 minutes there, I was intently listening, and my bladder was just getting fuller and fuller. But yeah, sorry, you were saying 10 years. You got your 10 years mandatory.
Yeah, 10 years mandatory, and they couldn't do any better than that, because what they wanted was, of course, I said my Caribbean connections and people like that, which they weren't going to get. But she did hold in some regard the information and being invaluable by describing how this whole scenario worked. And of course, they didn't have any clue. But so I got the 10. I wind up going to a federal correctional institution in Tallahassee, FCI, which is a minimum one level under maximum, because I was considered an escape risk, and began my 10-year sentence. Ultimately, what transpired from there, which is the reason why I'm able to have this conversation, is simply that when you go to prison, you have a job, you work, they put you to work, you're doing something. Well, my first job was put in construction. That's remodeling and updating and doing, working on the prison and shit like that. Excuse me. Well, one afternoon I'm out in the rec yard working out, and I befriend this guy Rolando, who is one of the characters in my book that I write about, obviously. And I said, dude, I don't want to build this goddamn prison, man. He said, well, you know what? My job is working in the legal library down in the education center. Now, Federal Correctional in Tallahassee was the hub of education within the Federal Bureau of Prisons, meaning if you wanted an education of any type or you wanted a degree of any kind, you could submit yourself for transfer to be transferred to that prison, and they would give you the education that you desired, because they would have civilian professors and teachers and whatnot come on and teach you. Mm-hmm. Well, every prison is also required by law for their prisoners to have access to legal material. So not only did they have in the education center, did they have a regular library, but they had a legal library as well. And when you watch these films or television programs, when they show a lawyer's office and they've got all these books on the walls behind them and shelves, and they're all the same colors and like this. Well, those are all here in the States. They're the United States annotated codes, and in the United States, law and adjudication is solely dependent on what's called precedent law, meaning that if you're adjudicated a certain way, and another individual has a case that has similar language to yours, and similar definitions and properties regarding the criminality that was taking place, means that you have to be sentenced similarly. You have to be sentenced appropriately. One guy can't be sentenced one way, and another guy doing the same thing can't be sentenced differently. You have to have unified sentencing. So that's what these United States codes annotated are for, and that's why we call precedent law. Well, Rolando, just so happens he worked in the law library. And he said, well, you know what? We kind of need a guy down there. Maybe let's go down there this afternoon and talk to Dennis. Now, Dennis Lehman, who is a character I read about in my book as well, he was a bank robber. He had been in for 28 years before I met him for bank robbery. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for having been given the most amount of time for that particular crime, and he didn't even rob the fucking bank. He was just the guy flying the airplane for the two that did. Mm. But the two that did, one got 6 years, one got 12. Dennis got 52 years. Why? Because they knew he was flying cocaine from Mexico to Nevada, but they couldn't catch him. Mm. So when they caught a bank robbery, they threw the fucking shit at him, man, and put him away. So back to the story, he winds up, he liked me right away. Timmy. So I got transferred. I got the job. I got it okay. And I got a job as a clerk. And about a year later or so, excuse me, actually a couple of years later, Rolando and I wound up taking a correspondence course through the University of Honolulu, and I got a law degree. I got an associate's in law, and also through Dennis Lehman, got a a degree in literary arts as well while I was there. I mean, I had the time to fucking do it. And then working with the law with prisoners and, and trying to, in order to be a clerk, you have to know your way through the books. You have to know how to find the law and find the precedent law and all this kind of and help these guys do this. So I figured what better way to do that than to get a degree and learn how to do this shit since I'm going to be here, So I did that. And I'm sitting in my office one day and they have what's called the Black's Legal Dictionary. And Black's Legal Dictionary is the sole defining book of legalese, whether you be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. Black's Dictionary defines that Latin terminology for you and actually gives you their definition of particular wording. Well, I'm sitting at my desk one day and I'm just looking through this fucking book, just fucking off, and I come to where it says cooperation. So I read them real quickly what their definition of cooperation is, and quite simply what it amounts to is that under that definition is that if you ask me for something and I give it to you, I have essentially, by that definition, cooperated with you. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, fuck. They want to know how I did all this shit. It took 3 weeks for me to tell them, so I think that's cooperation right there, according to this definition. They wanted my fine, which was ultimately $4 million that they got in cash. Didn't like that. They didn't like that at all. They wanted a cashier's check. I said, you take it to the bank and get a fucking cashier's check. I ain't doing it. So I considered that was cooperation according to this definition. So I wrote my own brief for submission to the Middle District Courts in Florida to the United States government for reduction of sentence based on cooperation and based on their definition of cooperation. And I didn't want to be writted out of prison to go to the proceeding for the judge to finally give a decision on my brief, which took about a month down the road. So I called my brother, I said, just go in my place and I'll call you tonight and you tell me what happened. Because I'm 3.5 years into this sentence, and it took me all that time to get my bunk from the middle of the room to the wall next to the window, because people either have to get sent home or they got to die, because, I mean, the average sentence in this fucking place is 35 years, and you don't move very quickly, through about the room. And there was no way, because if I'd have gone down to, read out to participate in my own hearing, I would have lost my bunk space at the window. So fuck that. It was more important to me at this point, than going there. So, excuse me. I'm 3 hours waiting in line to get on the phone to call collect home for my brother to find out what the hell took place. And he answered the phone, and first thing out of my mouth was, "What'd she give me, man?" And he says, "Dude, I gotta tell you," he says, "were you fucking that prosecutor or something?" He said, "because she was talking really very good about you." I said, "No, dude, stop screwing with me, man. Just tell me what happened." He goes, he says, "she gave you 4 years." And I said, "Dude," I said, "please don't screw with me. Come on now. What the hell, what took place?" He said, "I'm not kidding you, dude. She dropped you from 10 to 4. I'm 3.5 years in. Now I got 6 months left." And I started screaming, "Ah!" I fell backwards, almost pulled the fucking phone off the wall. And I'm pissed off 30 other inmates that are waiting to get on the phone. I would have gotten killed over that one. But in a matter of moments on that phone call, I went from, I had 6 years cut off my sentence in a matter of moments when my brother said that. And so here I am, I'm 6 months short to going home. And I got out on New Year's Day, 1992, New Year's Day. I spent 4 full years in prison, and I got my own ass out. And that's why I'm able to sit here and have this conversation with you now, because it's all behind me. It's all a matter of, the past. And like I said, there are no less than 5 gentlemen who were the head of these government agencies who are some of my dearest friends right now. I have friends, from the CIA and the Secret Service and the FBI and Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and John DC, who's one of my dearest friends, like I said earlier, was United States Customs. He did a Viceland video with me, a Vice Network video with me. We shot for 3 days in Everglades, and they put a 9-minute, 38-second clip of it online. And within the first 24 hours, it had 1.1 million views. And today it has over 110 million views, and I've gained an audience and fan following in Australia of about 12 million, 2.5 million in New Zealand, got 3 million throughout the Philippines and Indonesia. And I've now got a just shy of 1 million person fan base in Thailand, of all places, for Christ's sake. Because of that, because of my book, and and the telling of the tale and the way in which it's told. And it's quite literally the beginning and the ending of the Caribbean marijuana industry here in North America. Started with the first generation gentleman by the name of Lauren Tosh Brown. Tosh is a nickname. So Lauren Tosh Brown, Lauren Brown, you can look this stuff up. Like I said, don't take my word for it. This all sounds like bullshit coming out of here, going to there. That's fine. Take it as you will. But before you make that judgment, look it up, because this is all fact. There's nothing. I'm not hiding anything here at all. And this is just how it was done. This is just how I grew up. All I knew as a kid was 30 and 40-ton loads in ships with 300,000 pounds of weed on them from, Jamaica to Colombia. And, what prompted me to write this actually was, I had heard about the there was a guy in Washington here in the Northeast in the States by the name of Brian O'Day. And he was credited for bringing in some, 1 million pounds or so of Asian weed through the Gulf of Alaska, putting it on fish processing vessels, packaging it like frozen fish and bringing it right to the dock in Seattle and unloading it right from the boat right into trucks in broad daylight. And he would have in different strategic spots around the boat boxes that had actual frozen fish in them. So every now and then one of his guys would, knock one over, and people all around would see the fish scattering on the deck and shit, so wouldn't think anything of it. Well, take his 1 million pounds. George Young and all that he did, flying marijuana from, Mexico to California or to the Nevada desert or the desert in Arizona and driving there and like that. But there was also the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church out of Jamaica, who bought a mansion in Biscayne Bay on a little island called Star Island, one of only about 9 mansions on the island. I think Oprah Winfrey owns one of them. And they're credited with about 1 million pounds. And then there were some clowns and a guy run the little organization called the Black Tuna Gang, guy by the name of Robert Flatchhorn, who just passed away here not too long ago. And I got to hearing these stories, and I got to thinking to myself, well, damn, you take every one of these guys' claim to fame, you put them all in a pile. That doesn't even come to a year's work for us. I mean, so if you want to hear a story, dude, back the fuck up. Here it comes, And it's the book, Saltwater Cowboy, The Rise and the Fall of a Marijuana Empire. That's me. And this is the book. And this is now considered for the 6th year a historical textbook for 2 South Florida universities. Use my book as a required historical text, because it's history, it's the truth, it's validation, 100%. It's very cool, and I just love telling this story, man. And there's a lot. We just got started, but I don't want to. We can have another chat another time, dude. I'd love to.
So I'm kind of a bit speechless here, man. I've just gone. Yeah, I've just gone through my notes, and you basically answered 90% of the question I had about your actual sort of career, as it were. And yeah, what a tale. I may have to pester you for a signed copy of your book to add to my collection. But yeah, man, dude, like, so. You came out in what did you say, 92?
Yeah.
So you came out in 92. How?
That was January. That was New Year's Day.
Yeah.
January 1st.
Wow. So how did, obviously, like, when the operation wound down, how did that affect the 5 islands and the regions that you operated in? Was it a noticeable loss to like the economy for so many people to lose that kind of income?
Well, you know what? That being said, and that's an excellent question, my man. During that time, during that era, The main cash crop coming out of Florida was obviously oranges and orange juice. The second main crop coming out of Florida during those days was cannabis. So when I ran these 5 different crews and put all this work and got everybody working and kept them together, once this operation took place, Operation Peacemaker, they called it, the cooperation and the domino effect started to take place, and one after the other after the other. Ultimately, over 250 people were arrested in that operation. There was no hiding it. There was no escaping it. There were mandatory sentences. If you didn't cooperate, you were gone for life. And this was a reality that we all had to deal with. And we all had to learn as kids. It was, and even today, in retrospect, never did I wrap my mind around the fact that I was going to go in prison for the rest of my life. It's just so mind-bogglingly unbelievable that it just never occurred to me that this could happen until I got to prison. They slammed that fucking steel door shut, and I heard the keys go clink like that. That's when it became real to me. And I knew when I met Dennis and I met George, who was one of the characters in my book, that the book is not just a boring statistical romp through the war on drugs. It's actually a story about, that I tell every night in prison during games of gin rummy that I played with another bank robber who became so dear to me. He was like my father. He had been in 32 years before I met him. And every night we played gin rummy. And one night he just happened to say, Timmy, tell me, what? He knew I was a smuggler. I knew he was a bank robber, but we didn't know each other's story. And he would tell me, Timmy, all of a sudden tell me about this crazy shit you were doing, man. And I said, well, George, if you're finally going to ask me that question, let's start at the beginning. And that's how the book goes. It weaves back and forth into prison and these crazy potholing shit and back to prison. And I ultimately tell you about George's bank robbery thing and how he got the time he got and how he did it and all this kind of stuff. So it's rather engaging, and nothing is more important. And there's 172 plus reviews on Amazon about my book, and they all are pretty much the same. There's a couple of guys in there went off the rails on me a little bit, probably because they were either cops or they were prison guards or some shit like this. But I had to write back and let them know that this was written in the context of me as that kid, not me today. I have nothing but the utmost respect for law enforcement and what it is that they do. But when it came to that, and in that era, we weren't considering ourselves criminals. Criminal is not the word that we would use to describe what it was we were doing. We were considered ourselves to be outlaws. Outlaws meaning we worked outside your law because that's the law we don't necessarily agree with. So there's a huge difference in, from our point of view when you say one or the other, but this is just how it was. This is just the, what I grew up as, up with as a kid, and as shocking and unreal and as unbelievable as it may appear or it may sound to a lot of people, and I know it is. I know a lot of people out there going, bullshit. Well, like I said, please don't take my word for it. Look it up. This is all history. This is all everything. All the news agencies and everybody that ever reported on this, it's all there. It's all facts. It's all there for you to read. And all I'm doing is giving you a little more personalized, focused, in-depth look at the mechanics, the machinery, the operations, the sophistication of what it was that we ultimately did over 3 generations and perfected it and got better with every generation. And like everything else, we evolve. The government evolves. As the government evolves, we adapt and we evolve. So it was a game of, back and forth. Try this, do this. We're doing this. Let's counter move with that. Plus the fact that we were in an area where there was really nobody out there, man. I mean, take a look on the map of what Southwest Florida looks like. There's nothing here. And God bless you all for, sticking around for as long as you have, if you stuck through to the end and, had to listen to this. But I encourage you, pick up the book and have a read, man. I mean, nothing, and the reviews come out and they almost, like I said, sound the same, picked it up and couldn't put it down, or it was, so engaging. It's so, like this and so that. And then nothing more gratifying to an author than to have your work turn out exactly how you intended. And my intent was to pull you to the front of your seat from the first paragraph and keep you there till you read the last word. And that's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
And I pull no punches, man. I tell you exactly how it is.
It's definitely it sounds like it. I mean, obviously, I'll include links to relevant news sources, media, and obviously where people can get the book here in the UK. Actually, I've got quite a global audience. Most people, obviously, we know of the organization that shan't be named that's taken over the fucking world, but makes books very easy to come to our door. That's on anyone if they want to do it. I'm a victim of that system sometimes, although I try to buy pre-loved books. But yeah,
if you want a reader, I mean, I have an Audible version. You can listen to it. There's a Kindle version, which you don't have to have the book. It's just a push and a download. I don't know if that's available yet in the UK. I'm sure it is. Hardcovers were my first editions. Those are sold out. Those are going for, I've seen them being resold on Amazon for as much as $260 because they're such a unique tale and they're very rare and they're very sought after. But that being said, once that started to happen, my publisher called me about 8 months ago and said, Timmy, we're putting your book back into print because there's such a demand for it. So now it's out in paperback, which is all the same as the hardcover. The only difference is one's paper, one's hard, you know. And the guy that tells my book through Audible is a very cool guy. His name is Wes Talbot. And he, prior to doing my story, did mostly Stephen King's work. He did 32 books for Audible. Most of those were Stephen King's books. And he has the voice to tell the story.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I suppose my questions now, I guess, are going to be kind of post this, as it were. How quick, once you came out of prison, did you conceive of the book, or was it something that you were already sort of putting together, as you said, like while you were inside?
30 some odd years later.
Wow.
Never occurred to me because my getting out was, first of all, boy, I dodged the fucking bullet there. And it was, getting to work, putting myself into work, immersing myself into work, having a family, having 2 kids, growing up, being a father, doing all the things that I would, God help me, would not have had the opportunity to do had things not gone in a very particular sequence of events. And I'm grateful for that. And it wasn't until, like I said, almost 30 well, I published in 2017. I started writing the book in about a fall of 2015. It took me only 10 minutes to scratch out what I had at that time. But then as I did get my literary agent, and my publisher, and I worked with my editor at the time, was a man called Yaniv Poha, who would I had him for the first 4. I was contracted for an 80,000 word document for St. Mountains Press. I wrote over 250,000 words putting the book together because, like I said, dude, we were only getting started. I could write for freaking ever. But I had to condense it down into the version in which you read now. Plus, during halfway through the editing process, about 40,000 words into it, Yaniv took a job at Doubleday, at Random House Publishing. He became their senior executive editor. Well, the senior executive editor of St. Martin's Press, who championed my book in the beginning to Susan Robbins, the publisher, Mark Resnick's finishing up a book called American Sniper. A story about Chris Kyle, the deadliest sniper in the Marine Corps history here in the United States. And once he finished the editing of that book and Yaniv left, he took over and helped me with the second half of the book. But throughout the entire writing of this, and it wound up with 86,000 words because that's as small as I could make it. And out of the writing of those 86,000 words, the book only took 3 edits. That was it. 3 edits, and my literary agent emailed me one day with 3 words in all caps. Wow! Exclamation point. Just wow! Exclamation point. Nothing like that. He's never seen anything like that. 3 edits on an entire book because, and that's either a testament to my writing ability and my ability to tell a story, And it's a testament to Mark allowing me to have free reign and free will over writing something that he can't really edit, dude. You can't edit historical context, you know, it has to be taken, you know, and because of my background in writing that I never in prison, that I never thought I would ever fall back on, you know, helped me along with that process quite a bit, you know, and I wrote it under what's called the Chicago Manual of Style of Writing, and as opposed to an English style or American style of writing, which are more usage of $10 and $15 words, if you will, for lack of a better way of putting it. Chicago style, a manual of style, allows me to tell the story in my own voice and be still, in a lot of ways, grammatically correct within the confines of that writing style. So it doesn't come off like a third grader wrote the goddamn thing, you know, but it allowed me to be my own voice and tell you the story exactly the way I'm telling it you, but still remain grammatically correct. And that's what I think makes it a fun book for, you know, whatever generation you're from. I've had kids in 6th grade. A friend of mine, father, get stopped after school for picking up his kid and said, you know, your son had one of the most interesting book reports today about this guy who he says that you're friends with, you know, and he talking about my book, right? And his dad said, yeah, we know the guy, he's local, he lives right around here, you know. And so a 6th grader writing a report on my book. And at the gym, I have these, you know, a 92-year-old man sitting there on his machine one day, and he grabs me by the shirt on the way by, and he goes, you know what? He says, when we were, and he knew my story. He knew that I had written this book and my history, and, you know, in the industry like that. And he said, you know, when we were kids, we used to, and he starts telling me and opening up to me. And that's the coolest thing about being this person, is that regardless of who you are, what side of the fence you sit on, people are willing to open up and tell me about their little backstreet secrets and stuff like that. Plus, people who are not into this culture and don't smoke marijuana, it's benefiting them in a way by which it helps them understand that, you know, there was a way that this was done and could be done in a non-violent fashion, not what you see in the movies and all this bullshit and stuff like that. That's dramatization and writer's license in order for them to engage you into what people are interested in. People are mostly wanting to see in a genre such as this, which is always violently associated with, you know, criminal activity and things like that. Well, because that didn't exist, it draws in everybody, whether you're for it or you're against it. Because what it helps you to understand is the non-volatility in which, in the way in which we operated, but it also, and I hope by the message that I portray, the message I try to put out there, whether it be on a news report or it be on a podcast or it be at a cannabis festival or something like that, to help people understand that, you know, if you're going to, and now that you have the legal right, the legal choice to either smoke marijuana or not smoke marijuana, whether it be medicinal or recreational, you have that legal choice now. How do you want to go into your first experience? Do you want to go into it understanding about us and how kids grew up non-violently in a Caribbean marijuana industry, or do you want to take it and hear it and take the side of what's taking place on our southern border in Mexico and all the death and mayhem and destruction, and, you know, what's taking place over a simple plant, over marijuana? This just totally proves that, you know, that can be done in such a way that families were able to do it. And if you think about this, and it totally makes sense. And you know, I'll go ahead and pause and let you go at this time. If you think about it, what parent, and if you're a parent, and you'll understand this, and anybody listening who is a parent will absolutely understand this, what parent in their right mind would send their child offshore to meet a boat from another country loaded with marijuana and not fear for them being shot at or killed or whatever like that? No parent in their right mind would ever do that. But we were able to do that because the people we were dealing with were family and generational, just as we were. They were trusted as every bit as much as we were trusted. Nowhere in this world and nowhere geographically anywhere on this planet could this ever happen again in the way it happened. It was very unique, and the situation was very unique. And we got away with it up until we didn't.
Yeah.
So there you are, my friend.
Wow. I've got two quick questions, and then we'll wrap this up. I mean, my audience are used to long episodes. It's been a while since we've done one this long, but we'll I just feel I want to ask them basically. So with Florida isn't obviously one of the so-called rec states that we see in America. Obviously, there's I think 23 at the minute that have passed some form of state legislation.
Not recreational, it's medicinal.
Medicinal. So is there, obviously, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it and whatever else, but from my interpretation, this side of the pond, the governor's not as pro-rec as some other state governors. And so that's kind of, there's been an issue there. My question is more to is anything happening to kind of honor the legacy or to allow those same areas to participate in the emerging legal industry? Because frankly, its legacy and its sacrifice of these people helped build it across the United States. I look at Mendocino these days, and of the like 250 families that were there, there's so few left of the actual people that built the fucking scene on the West Coast, domestically speaking.
That in the Emerald Triangle that actually began taking it seriously and growing serious marijuana. Yes, you're absolutely right. The Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino counties create the Emerald Triangle in Northern California. And, you know, when they took us out of the scene, out of the picture with Operation Peacemaker, and I had a visit and was invited actually to the office of the Director of Homeland Security for here in Southwest Florida. He wanted to meet a legend. I laughed at him. I said, "A legend?" He says, "Yeah, come and talk to me if you're willing to." We had a rather long conversation one afternoon about things that I wasn't privy to, and a lot of things that he was never privy to. But what it all boiled down to quite significantly was, and I got this from almost every agent that I've ever spoken to involved in this case or any of these cases, was that, and it comes out just like this: I wish they would just legalize this shit and get it over with. And that's the truth of it, you know, because the United States government has recently and is going to here quite recently remove marijuana from what they call a Schedule I narcotic. Narcotics and drugs in the United States are classified in schedules. Schedule I being LSD, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. Schedule II, cocaine.
It's nothing. Sorry to correct you. I think it's MDMA is Schedule I. Meth is actually Schedule II or III because of its use as Adderall. It actually has medicinal value in their interpretation. Yeah, we have the same scheduling, sort of a very loosely similar system over here of scheduling.
Okay, well, what it basically boils down to is that it's finally getting the position in which it deserves. I mean, there for the longest time, the United States disavowed any knowledge of it having any medicinal properties whatsoever when science says otherwise. But when your scientific evidence is coming from a non-sanctioned United States government entity, which they're not allowing because it's against the law under federal guidelines, it doesn't have credibility, and it hasn't had credibility until recently when the United States government several years ago decided to not entertain with funding or budgeting to interfere with state law regarding marijuana. They allow them to do that on their own. They just step back and step out of it because they see what's coming down the pipe. They see that ultimately within the next 2 years, every state in the United States will have some sort of recreational or medical aspect to the cannabis, you know, that they're selling. They're not willing to ultimately lose out on a multi-billion-dollar taxable industry that if they keep going the way they're going, they're going to miss out on it. You know, so they're going to wind up, you know, incrementally working their way back in. But The biggest and most important factor with that regard is simply that the language of the law as it is written under the United States government has to be changed. It has to be rewritten. The language has to be rewritten to allow these changes to be made. Otherwise, they're bound to the language that they didn't write. They're still bound to it. So until legislation changes and that language changes, it's still going to be federally illegal. And that day is coming. And it's coming quite simply because people who are now my age, baby boomers and whatnot, as they're called, are now becoming the people who are occupying these positions of political influence and importance. And because they're of my age, they understand the cannabis industry the way we understand it. And they know now that, boy, did we make a big boo-boo. We really screwed up, because they had it going on for so long. And what a lot of people don't understand is, this history goes back to the first original British colonies here in the United States. Those 13 original British colonies were instructed to grow one crop and one crop only, and that crop was hemp. The oil they burned in the lamps that they used at night was made from hemp oil. Every sail on every ship, every rope on every ship from antiquity up until World War II was made of cannabis. The word canvas is Latin for cannabis. So what did they do? They ruined that industry. Hemp products, I don't know if you've ever worn a T-shirt made from hemp. It is one of the most supple, the most comfortable, the most breathable, the most pleasant thing to have on your body, and the government outlawed it because they consider that a close cousin to marijuana, and they schedule it the same goddamn way. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that they would do something like that, to take something that has the ability to save our dying planet. You can make bottles out of clear plant cellulose, is what it's called. I have rolling papers made out of clear plant cellulose, made from plants. There's a car made in Canada called a Castrol. It's a totally, nearly 100% made from hemp. Even the clear windows in the car were made from clear cellulose, clear plant cellulose. The only thing that was not was the drive train mechanisms and the engines and whatnot were the only ones that were not. They actually took a Castrol, dug a hole, buried it in the ground. 2 years later, came back, and the only thing that was in there was the engine and the transmission and the frame to the car. That was it. Everything else biodegraded. Henry Ford, in the early 30s, visiting and putting on a demonstration at the United States, one of the United States World's Fairs, put on a demonstration between a Model A, two Model A's sitting side by side. One was made out of a metal body. One was made out of a carbon composite of hemp. His demonstration throughout this whole expo was to take an axe and swing it and stick it in the metal bumper of that metal car, and he would pry it and pull it out. He'd walk next door to the hemp body car and swing it and hit that son of a bitch as hard as he could, and that thing bounced back so hard it almost took his head off. It didn't make one dent in it, not one scratch in it. It's the most durable product, and what's the United States government done with it? Shelved it, put it, buried it, took it out of the scene. Every plastic bottle that's polluting every river and every ocean on our planet. The garbage patch in the Pacific is mostly plastic. That could have all been eliminated had it all been made from hemp. And there was a possibility that could have done that. But when the United States decided that they were going to get rid of marijuana for two reasons. The Mexicans, migrants, were bringing it over back in the early 30s. They were bringing it over to the United States and using it recreationally after work. It was their pastime. It was just what they did after work to relax and unwind. Well, it made its way up and around the Gulf Coast and into Louisiana, made it into the jazz scene. And, of course, blacks in the jazz scene, now they're smoking marijuana. So the government, at that time, Randolph Hearst was one of the major media outlets within this country. He owned a majority of the newspapers that were being read across the country, and that was their social media at the time. When you read what you read in the newspaper, it was gospel. Well, he partnered up with Harry Anslinger, who was our first drug czar back in those days, and created this propaganda program whereby they started bashing, the Mexicans for having brought this here. And the reason why they're doing that is because it's made its way into the jazz scenes, and the blacks are now smoking it, and the blacks are smoking it and raping your white women and children and your girl, and your kids. And, they just turned it into this thing in which it was not, hence the movie Reefer Madness, if you've ever heard of this movie. It's just the totally ridiculous kind of a thing, but they did that so they could put an end to it. But what they did by doing that was put an end to the hemp. I can remember as a kid going to the movies, and between movies on a double feature, they would show these Midwest farmers with these big giant thrashers going through hemp fields and producing hemp, because everything that the GIs were using in World War I and World War II, their tents, their fatigues, their boots, their backpacks, their belts, everything that they wore was made from hemp. And it was durable, it was light, it was functional. And they just destroyed that industry. And in fact, wound up ultimately, not knowing, destroying our earth at the same time by polluting it with plastics, which is ridiculous to think about. But that's a whole other subject. That's a whole other thing. But, just the cannabis industry as a whole has been muddied up and dirtied and given such a bad rap that a story like this is necessary. A story like this is necessary to be told to those who wish to not remain ignorant, or those who are ignorant that could use a little bit of a lesson, and a little bit more of a better understanding about that which they know nothing. And I'm just the guy that can do that, And I have to say in closing, Simpa, that I may be touted and offered these accolades as far as being the biggest pot hauler and the biggest this and that. Well, I don't accept that. Thank you. I appreciate the accolade. I appreciate, the sentiment and the feeling behind it, because I understand it. But what it boils down to, quite simply, is that I could not have done this on my own. It took literally hundreds of brass balled men and women that I grew up with to do the things that we did, and do them in the manner and the size in which we did them. So I can't take the complete pat on the back for this. I can facilitate their activity, but it takes them to follow through and make it work. So, thank you to them, and they deserve as much accolade as I do, because everybody behind the scenes that came up behind me faced this, these life sentences at one point or another for doing just exactly what we all believed in doing, and quite simply trying to supply a demand that was insatiable. And it literally took a small group of people to satisfy the demands of a larger one. And this is the story that I tell, and I thank you so very much for your time, Simpa. This has just been absolutely incredible. I love this shit, man. And I'm excited for your viewers and your subscribers to hear this.
Me too, brother. I'll add a couple of comments, if that's all right, and then ask you my last cliched question that I ask every guest.
Bring it up.
But yeah, you articulated it wonderfully there about the divergence of cannabis and the creation, as it were, of hemp and marijuana, with the J to make it sound Hispanic, and the racism of Harry Anslinger and his legacy, not just through the precursor agency of the DEA, through the DEA, and then into international stance on the drug committee under the UN that formed after this. And he sat on that deep into the 60s. And so that racism, that position, that ignorance, that bigotry persisted. And as you say, the Hemp for Victory campaign in the States, there's a few academics that are scratching the surface, and there is a certain narrative, and I'll put allegedly here in big letters, that it was gunpowder as well. Again, this is probably going to get me in trouble somewhere with the YouTube masters. Allegedly, if you look at ancient Chinese recipes, you potentially could make an explosive from the roots of cannabis. So there's an interest. I've been picking at that for a while, and I'm waiting for someone in my comments to jump in and go, "Oh, I've got a source for that." But I have heard this now. I have heard this. Yeah, I'll copy you in for sure if I find out. But I agree. I think the US has got an obligation now on the international stage. It's allowing what it's allowing in different pockets and whatever. And yeah, there's the rescheduling, but cannabis should be, for me, as free as tobacco or alcohol, because all they're going to do is, there's generations of kids right now that are becoming saltwater cowboys in different ways, because even in their legalized states, there's still a black market. There's still the supply not being met. The culture is not being heard. The right people, that village that helped you do what you did, their needs are not being met. And these corporate, cashed cow individuals, the same people that funded all the politicians for generations, have vilified, demonized, and tracked you guys, and now going, how much can we make from this? Yeah, invest. While the little guy is still hungry. And I just hope that people like yourself telling these stories embolden these communities to go, no. Where's our fucking piece? We gave you what you have now. Pay it forward. And I hope in some way that this podcast plays a part to that, man, because it's a fantastic story.
Does, one message, if nothing else, one message that I would like everybody to take away from this is simply the fact that, regardless of where you sit on this issue in this culture or this genre regarding cannabis, something should always be understood, and it's important that most people do, and they understand that, even though we were kids doing what we were doing, and regardless of the time in which we were doing it, what it's done, and what I hope this message can do, regardless of what venue it's portrayed on, sheds a light on, and helps you to make a decision now that you're capable and legally allowed to make a decision, particularly here in the United States. I would like to help them and help them to understand that by making the decision that they're making, they're not in any way contributing to what's taking place on our southern border. That should not be a factor, in them making this decision. The decision-making process should come by way of listening to my story and listening to how a group of families who are just like you and myself, and just like every other buddy, every other brother and the guy you pass on the street. We're no different than anybody else. But what we would like you to understand is quite simply that, now that you have this right to make this decision, you want to go into it with the knowledge of knowing that, having this vision in your mind of this cool Rasta dude standing in the middle of 200 acres of virgin bud in the Blue Mountains in Jamaica, and in his cool dreads and his no shirt and his cut off jeans and barefoot, just tending to the crop and just just loving on the ganja and making it the best they can make it. Mm-hmm. Or envisioning the little old guy in Colombia in his his cotton hat, his cotton blouse, and cotton pants, and his family out there in their white cotton dressings, taking care of the plants and doing this sort of thing, and giving you that home vibe, giving you that sense of ease and that sense of relaxation, which is what the drug or plant or whatever you wish to call it creates for you. Mm-hmm. I would rather have them going into it envisioning that than envisioning a picture of some poor bastard from Mexico. He's got this bale strapped on the back of his back, and it's got to get it somewhere near Phoenix in lieu of his family being held hostage in Mexico until that happens. I don't want them to go into this, with that in their mind. I want them to go into it in their mind knowing that there was a time in which it existed that this could be done the way we did it. Mm-hmm. Fun. We made it fun to be able to do. As dangerous as it was, like I said, don't allow that joviality to belie the seriousness, but you can't go into this and approach this in that serious mode all the time. Otherwise, you're going to be so freaked out, you're going to wind up fucking up at some point in time.
Yeah.
And this is what I want people to understand. And this is how I want them to maybe influence their choice on whether or not to try it, because now you have the legal right to do so. And do it knowing that there were people like me and the people that I grew up with that were just like yourself. We didn't want to hurt anybody. We just wanted to give what everybody wanted to have. And God's honest truth, Teddy wasn't lying when he said, we just couldn't get it in here fast enough, because the millions of pounds of shit that we brought in here, it went somewhere, man. And we didn't force it down anybody's fucking throat either. So there you go, my brother Simpa.
So true, so true. Man, yes, I suppose, yeah, just the cliched last question. What does the future hold for you, man?
Right now, working with a studio out in LA quite closely. I go out about twice a month, XRM Studios. We're waiting for this goddamn writer's strike and actor's strike and to get done with, and we can go ahead and proceed with the writing of the script for my motion picture, which is the finances are being put together now for it. I think we're up somewhere around 45 million. We're looking at about maybe 80, 90 million to produce and to create the motion picture. I'm working on a television series as well as a documentary. So I've got a lot of stuff going on, and it's taking quite a bit to do. And it's a very bit of a daunting task, is getting a book published in as well as getting a movie or a television series made. It's just as daunting of a task to do. And it takes the right type of people to believe in the story. It's always very much one thing for me to sit here with guys like yourself, and I have to say, you haven't really said much, but you're really quite good at what you do, man. It's very easy for me to sit here and impart these stories the way I do, but it's also very much another thing for them to get off their ass, or not even get off their ass, just go on your phone and push a goddamn button and buy the book. It's really simple to do, because what you're hearing, and a lot of what you're hearing is not in the book. The books, there's other crazy shit that's in the book. There's just too much to tell for me to do that. Like, growing up with that amount of money, and the adults always being cognizant and willing to help you understand how to spend money without having anything to show for it. Because if you start getting stupid and buying Ferraris and Porsches and shit like that, and gaudy goddamn diamond rings and building big houses, well, you're done, man. You just don't work anymore, because now you're in your liability. You're no longer an asset. So it was important for them to teach us their ways, how to spend money, to not have anything to show for it. But it was we took it upon ourselves to figure out in our own ways. And they were a lot of fun, man. Ways how to figure out how to spend money and not have anything to show for it, just by pissing it away. And I'll leave you with one scenario, and that is, me and four of my buddies took $200,000 each one weekend for a 4-day long weekend from Miami to South Beach. And we took the tab every night for every club from Miami to South Beach. We took over the entire tab. We took $1 million between us, with the sole intentions of having just enough gas money to drive home. Just to get rid of the money, because there was more coming. I mean, that's how sick it was. But anyways, I could go on, and I just love to chat with you again, Simpa. You've been just an awesome dude. And like I said, I love my UK audience, man. They're cool.
Yeah, man, for sure. We'll get you back on. Now we've got the bulk of your story out there. I imagine there's gonna be quite a lot of comments and questions from people. So yeah, I'll correlate them and get back to you, and we'll definitely get you back in the hot seat again and continue this conversation, because, as you say, there is just so much lived and living experience there, that in stories that so people need to hear of, as you say, a time before the violence, before cartels, before the war on drugs really became terroristic, became multinational, became vicious, violent, and malevolent.
Right. And that's, once again, the common misconception. I mean, that's not to say that it didn't occur from time to time from different people to different people, because different scenarios take place. Obviously, when you've got all your money online, of course, you're going to be very protective of it. And if you're dealing it out or you're fronting it out and you don't get paid, you're going to have, there's going to be some retribution involved in that. And that's how that begins. But when it comes to us, we never owned the shit. And like I said in the math, I got 32 chances to get your shit in before you can even decide to get pissed at me.
Yeah.
Come on. And I never lost a load that I never gave away. And what I mean by that is if I can buy for $10 a pound, I could spend $170,000 of my own money, put 17,000 pounds of shit on a rickety old boat that's not even registered. It belongs to one of my buddies, and put it offshore and set it adrift on Naples, and have 3 or 4 guys from Naples call the law on that boat out there. And next thing you know, Coast Guard's there, Marine Patrol's there, all the cops are out there, and they're all score. Well, I'm moving 40 tons in down here. And it only cost me $170,000 to get them off my ass. And I made 2.6 million on that job down there. So what do I give a shit? This is how it was. So I'll leave you with that, my friends. And there's plenty more where that came from.
Tim, it's been a pleasure. It's really been a pleasure. I'll include, like I said, links where people can get your book and relevant media sources, etc. Go off and enjoy your day, brother. Thank you for your time.
I'm at Instagram at Original Saltwater Cowboy. Feel free to jump in and DM me, say hello, and I'd be happy to say hey back. I'm just that kind of guy. I'm available. I'm accessible. I'm easy to reach.
Nice, man. People appreciate that. And I'm sure they've enjoyed your authenticity and your honesty here. So thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure, Simpa. And once again, thank you to you, and thank you to your subscribers and your viewers and those who may pass this on. I hope you enjoy it and understand it for really what it is. This is history. And that's why my book required historical text, which shocked the shit out of me, man. But hey, there you go. Once again, thank you, and God bless you, man. You do good work.
Appreciate it, out. Man.
Keep telling the story, man. You're doing awesome.
Always. Really appreciate it, brother. I'll let you leave now, and I'll do my general housekeeping, my summation, and get this recording finished. So yeah, thanks again for your time, brother. Take it easy. Peace. Wow. I'm sorry. This is going to be my first 4-hour podcast. I'm not going to cut this in half. I think this story deserves to be in one chunk. I'm a bit blown away by that, really. Just had a really nice conversation of pre and post recording there as well. So I got to know Tim a bit more. And wow. Like I said, the numbers, as we kind of alluded to at the start, are so difficult to quantify. When you start to think of the level, like I said, like he said, the book is thoroughly researched and verified. There is an unbelievable amount of media that has been sort of digitized that documents this, from local press, national press, court documents, etc. And yeah, I'm going to try and do my best to obviously put the images in that we discussed into different areas to try and aid in, helping you visualize kind of the more, I guess, unbelievable aspects of this story. Not unbelievable in the sense that they didn't happen, but unbelievable in the sense that in that way that fact is always, stranger than fiction, or in this case, I guess, more unbelievable than fiction. But yeah, definitely get a copy of that his book as soon as possible and getting that read. That's going on to my endless pile of books that I'm reading. Yeah, I'm a bit blown away here by this, guys. I do feel like I've just binged the documentary series, which I imagine is what yourselves probably feel like as well at this point. Really looking forward to seeing what happens when the actors strike, the writers strike. Hopefully gets resolved. Fucking Netflix and Disney and the big fucks need to pull the fingers out and sort that shit out. The sooner we can get these series and these documentaries on the go, I'm incredibly interested to see who the studios get to play Tim. But yeah, be interesting to see who gets cast. Anyway, I'm waffling on here. It's late at night. I've been sat here for 4 hours straight now. That was a phenomenal conversation, but I need to go and process all of this. So I'm going to go roll a very nice joint, have a nice cup of tea, and go relax for the evening. I hope you beautiful people enjoy your day, night, suppose there are any options, whatever time of day it is that you're listening to this. And yeah, please do, if you enjoyed this, give us a like, share, subscribe, rating. I'm trying to think what else you do on online platforms these days. Whatever it is you do to show interaction, appreciate the interaction. So thank you very much, guys. Obviously, yeah, hit us up, subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. This helps bump up the numbers because, frankly, the language and the content of the conversations I bring to you fine folks mean that I am not the algorithm's most favorite podcast on any platform currently online. No matter what I do to try and update, I'm obviously tweaking things here and there, but still, yeah, not quite reaching the numbers that I believe this content deserves, frankly. And I'm not saying that egoically. I think because of the quality of the guests that we have on. Yeah, follow us on all social media platforms at The Simpa Life. And yeah, check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee a month, you can help me keep the lights on in this project. So wherever you are in the world, make the most of the day. Tell somebody you love that you love them. Share a hug. Spread some love. Go be nice. See you next week. Bullshit. Fuck off. Oh, I'm so tired. How far back do I have to go? This is my favorite part of the podcast. It's when I don't have a guest to play off and I'm going to actually sit here with my insane self. Oh.